world gone insane. An upside-down civilization that cannot be real. A world of madness and terror.
It's the Dana Gould Hour.
Today's show is brought to you by Casper. Get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/Dana and using the promo code Dana. This episode of the Dana Gould Hour is also brought to you by Blue Apron. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/DGH. You will love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals from blueapron.com/DGH. Oh, it's 2017 and everything is great! At least as far as fans of this podcast are concerned, because this episode is a winner. Now, if there is one complaint I don't get about this podcast, it's I can't keep up with how quickly you put them out. And my promise to you is that will continue. As far as today is concerned, if you're a fan of, say, The Walking Dead, or Evil Dead 2, or Day of the Dead, or Kill Bill, or Django Unchained, or any of the 7 million movies and television shows this gentleman has worked on, Greg Nicotero is here today. Greg has gone from being one of the leading special effects makeup wizards in Hollywood to one of the hottest producers and directors in television. He's also a good friend of mine, and I have used that friendship for your listening pleasure. Also joining us is Kevin Fitzgerald. Kevin is not a household name, but he should be. He is a man I can only describe as a real-life Forrest Gump. Kevin Fitzgerald. Kevin is a very funny and talented comedian based in Denver, who I've known for probably 25 years. Kevin is also a very brilliant veterinary surgeon and is the star of Animal Planet's Emergency Vets. So I was recently in Denver and I was talking to Kevin, and I happened to ask him how he got into being a veterinarian, and he said, Keith Richards made me do it. And I said, as you would have said, Keith Richards? Keith Richards? And he said, yeah. And what I learned was, from this guy that I've known for 25 years, unbeknownst to me, starting in 1969, Kevin was a bodyguard for the Rolling Stones, among many other bands. Kevin has worked with the Rolling Stones, Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys, Wu-Tang Clan. The list goes on and on and on, and he is here today to tell us about it. As for me, as you may have guessed, I have been busier than a one-armed traffic cop with a skin rash. We are currently in pre-production on Season 2 of Stand Against Evil, which means that we're breaking stories for the season and writing scripts. The special effects shop is already designing a new season's worth of demons and monsters. And I'm also back at work on this little baby. And as you may guess, that takes time. I am also still touring. February 23rd, 24th, and 25th, I will be back in one of my favorite cities, Portland, Oregon, performing at Helium and hanging out at food trucks. March 23rd, 24th, and 25th, I will be at the same club, Helium, in a different city, St. Louis, Missouri. In April, well, we'll get to April next episode. But I'll tell you now, I'm hoping to record my next stand-up comedy special and album in April, and I'll be telling you where it is once it's all set, because I'd love you to come out if you can. But in the meantime, good Christ, you've been patient, you've waited long enough. Let's do our filthy business.
Dana Gould Hour. Free and
Settle back now, content, comfortable, well-fed, and ready for some fine entertainment. Is everybody happy? Then let's go. It's showtime.
Years ago, I was performing at the Funny Bone in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this is in the late 80s, early 90s. And what a lot of comedians did during those days is they'd come into town and then they'd get some Coke and they'd do some shows, and then the weekend would be an endless party, a Coke and drug-fueled, waitress-pocked party. And what I would do in those days is pretty much what I do now, only the technology was a little more cumbersome. I'd come into town, and I'd make sure that the club had a VCR, and then I would go to the local video store and rent some video cassettes of horror movies, and that's what I would do when I wasn't doing stand-up. And at this particular week, I was working with a young comic from Pittsburgh named Frank Nicotero. And we became friends, and he said, when you go back to L.A., you have to meet my cousin. My cousin Greg is a special effects makeup guy. He worked on Evil Dead 2. And I was like, I'd love to meet your cousin. And we got back to L.A., and I kept pestering Frank. And then I ended up driving out to Chatsworth and met his cousin, who had this company called KNB Effects Group, which stood for Kurtzman Nicotero Burger. And his cousin Greg and I became friends. We quickly elbowed him right out of the picture.
Yeah, I don't even know where he is anymore.
But since meeting Greg Nicotero, we became pretty good friends pretty quickly. And everyone's career has continued to pace, but yours has really, of all the friends that I have, you are the one friend whose career literally I got to watch explode and put you into a completely different stratosphere. I know you don't see it that way because you're you and you're inside it. But, my sister knows who you are, which is, remarkable. But you've not changed outside of your 50-person entourage and endless drug. I can't even get through the joke. But I'm here in the beautiful home of Greg Nicotero.
This is the sound of my voice.
Excellent. So you are from Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Now, speaking specifically of zombies, Pittsburgh is like the capital of zombies because of George Romero.
It's literally ground zero.
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead was shot probably 20 minutes from my house, where I grew up. My parents still live in the same house. My upbringing consisted of reading Famous Monsters magazine, and every Saturday night, this was before SNL existed, there was a TV show on called Chiller Theater. It was hosted by a guy named Bill Cardill. Bill was the local weatherman on Channel 11, and then, of course, at night he would host monster movies.
Was that Chilly Willy?
Chilly Billy Cardell.
Chilly Billy Cardell. You know who's obsessed with Chilly Billy Cardell?
Who?
Jimmy Miller.
Because Jimmy's from Pittsburgh.
Right, because he's from the Burgh. Dennis Miller's brother, for those of you who don't know.
So for me, my Saturday nights consisted of reading monster magazines and sketching and trying to stay up late enough to catch a double feature of two great horror movies. That was kind of how it all started. And when Saturday Night Live premiered, they pushed Chiller Theater to 1 o'clock.
Right.
And they cut one movie out. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to be able to. Now I have to stay awake until 1 o'clock in the morning.
For the movie to start.
Right.
So and you couldn't tape it.
No.
Because technology did not exist yet.
Technology didn't exist. You'd get the TV guide, and you'd have to flip through the TV guide and find the movie and circle it. And you would spend all this energy and effort trying to stay awake. And then 3 minutes before the movie would start, you'd fall asleep and you wake up and it was the next morning and your parents are yelling at you because you have to go to church.
Yeah. You wake up and Davy and Goliath is on.
Yes. Or Kimba the White Lion.
Kimba the White Lion.
Or something like that. So I was...
By the way, just remarkably similar. Like your story, my story, Kirk Hammett's story.
Yeah.
It's all the same story. And what is interesting specifically about those three examples is we all went into different yet similar pursuits.
I really would say there's an endless number of people. If you look at Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino and Eli Roth and Frank Darabont. Frank Darabont is exactly like us.
Right.
I always sort of make the joke that
to the point that we all three own lawgiver statues.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I always sort of think that there's like this weird little scar that each of us has. That there was one sort of creature that had multiple appendages, and I was one of them, and you were one of them, and Kirk was one of them, and Slash was one.
It looks like a micro Goulardi, and it's
yes, or a Zackerly. It's a little Zackerly shaped scar,
tiny Zackerly shaped scar.
So yeah, man, it's just something, the ability to spark your imagination. It was the sense of wonder. I mean, I always loved the catchphrase that Cinefantastique had, which was, it was a magazine with a sense of wonder. That's always what got me. That's why 2001 and Planet of the Apes and The Exorcist and all those fantasy, supernatural thrillers always appealed to me, and you look at Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And for me, the thing always was being a kid and going, how did they do that? Like, for some reason, my brain was wired to deconstruct what I was seeing and try to figure out how it was done, whether it was a little 18-inch puppet that they filmed one frame at a time, or it was a 25-foot mechanical shark. Whatever it was, somehow or another, maybe, I would love to I wish I could go back in time and remember the moment where I was like, oh, I want to know how to do that. But like maybe it was Famous Monsters and it was a picture of Jack Pierce making up, sitting there with a cigarette in his mouth and a big giant brush
and
brushing,
and very flammable.
Dangling with the huge ash sticking right off the end of it.
But it is interesting. Famous Monsters. I have spoken of it as much on this podcast and in other episodes. It was this Bible for kids that were into this stuff. Like it was. Not only was it required reading, but in the days before the internet, it was your lifeline to other kids and adults that were into what you were into. Right. Like the Famous Monsters was published by this guy, or edited by this guy, Forrest Ackerman, who was a grown man, and he loved this stuff. And when you were a kid and your parents thought you were weird because you didn't like sports, but you were really into Planet of the Apes, it was comforting to know, well, this guy's a grown-up.
There's somebody else.
Yeah. And it is true, those photos that you don't have today because it's all pictures of people in front of a computer keyboard. But to see, oh, that's how they made the Wolfman. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was just they glued that on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fast. Oh, King Kong is just basically a doll that they move stop motion. And Famous Monsters was such a it was sort of the Rosetta Stone of that language if you were into that stuff. Now, were you a sports kid?
Not really. Like I didn't play a lot of sports. Growing up in Pittsburgh, we had the Steelers and we had the Pirates and
the Penguins.
And the Penguins. Yeah, I was never a big hockey guy.
See, that was the only sport I played.
Well, because of where you grew up.
Yeah.
So I wasn't that big into it, but I will say that whole sense of how did they do that? When you'd see the photos in the magazines. And if you think about Famous Monsters, number one, it wasn't really written. Like there was never an article that you got any information out of. It was literally puns. Really if you really think about it, as much as we all love, and I know I'm going to get some shit for this. As much as we love Famous Monsters,
we have talked
there's not one fucking article that I've ever read that I went, that's interesting. You look at it for the pictures.
Yeah, believe me, we have talked about Heidi Saha at length on this podcast. There's a lot going on in Famous Monsters that you were unaware of as a kid.
Without a doubt. But, from what happened was in the 50s when they made the Universal Library syndicated. All of a sudden, they had all these movies and they figured, well, we got to repackage all these movies and get them out there for a whole new generation to see. So you pick up a Famous Monsters. It wasn't even just the amazing cover in the vibrant colors, which there's a bunch of them hanging
so
on the walls
visually
here.
arresting.
It jumped off the newsstand. But then in the back, this is what I think really sold it for a lot of us. You could actually buy stuff. You didn't have to, you could go to the hobby shop or whatever, but there would be ads for, here's a poster of Dracula.
Yeah.
Here's a poster of Frankenstein.
Or
here's a model kit of the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Or a monkey.
Or
you could buy a spider monkey.
You could buy spider monkeys.
Or a one-man submarine that I doubt worked.
I bought that submarine, and it was literally a cardboard box with submarine panels put on it.
Or a giant ball. You could,
or X-ray vision.
X-ray vision.
You would buy it. My uncle once was like, "Why do you need X-ray goggles?" Meanwhile, I'm like, "Because I want to look through girls' clothes.
Exactly.
Why else would I need them?"
Yeah. No, it was called Captain Company.
Captain Company. Captain Company,
and you would go in the back, and there was all of this. I still have. Well, I don't think I have it still, but I got my Barnabas Collins poster. Mm-hmm. All sorts of stuff. Never did buy a monkey. That's one of my great regrets.
They would just show up in the box trying to claw out the man.
My uncle had a monkey. My uncle Donald, my dad's brother, when we were a kid, he had before I was born, in the late 50s, early 60s, he had a monkey.
Where did he get a monkey?
I don't know, because we lived in the middle of Massachusetts. But my dad tells a story about Uncle Donald's monkey. I know it sounds like something.
I was going to say, are you sure he physically had a monkey? It
sounds like something you'd hear at a trial. Read back the part about Uncle Donald's monkey.
And try not to laugh when you say it.
By the way, we just found the name of this episode.
Yes.
Uncle Donald's monkey.
Perfect. So that's how I got into it, man. And I love that we all share the same love for this stuff. And that's the interesting thing that cultivates friendships like ours. And as busy as we get, you can pick up like it's the next day and start talking about the Wolfman again, and all of a sudden
and it's like no time has gone by because I've been fortunate enough to have my little horror show, Stand Against Evil, on IFC, and we both shoot in the same city. I get to see you more, but you're down and you go to Atlanta to shoot Walking Dead, and you're there 9 months a year. And we'll email occasionally, and we'll gab on the phone, or I'll see you at Monsterpalooza if you come up. But I won't see you. It's like LA friends, like, oh my God, he's one of my best friends. I see him like 4 times a year. Yeah. But you see, I haven't seen you since I think I was at your house in Atlanta.
Yeah, in July.
Yeah, but it was just like I saw you yesterday. Yeah. Like, oh hey. Yeah. And that's a great thing. And I think that's probably true with people that are really into sports or whatever it is that you have an interest in.
It's just us.
But there is a shorthand, and it is Forrest Ackerman. Like if I meet Kurt Hammett, I go I'm a big Famous Monsters fan. You instantly, there's a 5-hour conversation that you don't need to have because so you know that world completely. As I said, if there was ever a person that I have encountered in my life who I would refer to as a real-life Forrest Gump, it is my guest today, Kevin Fitzgerald. You're working security for the Rolling Stones with your brother. And I want to hear about when Keith Richards came to you and told you that you needed to get a life. And then we'll go back to how it started.
At the end of the 78 tour, they have different, in the band, people have different jobs. Mick is in charge of tickets and pricing and merchandising and the money things and the day-to-day thing of the tour. And Ronnie has his thing with production, and Charlie's in charge of the stage and the art of it, lighting, and Keith's in charge of, the bouncers. And so he was my boss, and so he hung. So Keith Richards was your boss. You and your brother worked security. We were working for bands, put ourselves, through school, and that's how we lived. And so at the end of the 78 tour, Keith pays it himself, and he goes, listen, you've been with us, 69, 72, 75, now 78. This isn't going to last forever. The public's fickle. We're going to be the flavor of the month. They never dreamed they'd still be playing, and that was the biggest fear that you could become, forgotten.
And this was 1978?
It was 78, and he goes, why don't you do something with your life? Why don't you go to school? I'll help you. Geez, you can't be doing this. You can't be a bouncer when you're 50, and so...
So basically, Keith Richards is your guidance counselor.
And so, but he's the hippest cat in the world, and when he says something, you listen, baby. And when Keith tells you something, so I came back and he wrote my letter for my recommendation for vet school. It's probably on a wall somewhere, And so I got in, and then I did the 78 tour in 81, and for every tour that I did, they paid for 2 years of school. So they didn't pay me for the tour, but paid tuition and books. So, when I got to school, I didn't know any money. Everybody else had these big loans.
And how does, and I clearly I want to go back to how this whole thing started, which is unusual because you're just an Irish kid from Denver. But how does Keith Richards write a college recommendation letter?
Just like anybody else. They put their pants on one leg at a time.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be starstruck, but after you've worked with them for a long time and see how normal they are,
Yeah, they're working class guys. They're
they're the best ever. They're nicest. I'll tell you how nice. My job was the advance. I have an Irish name, and Barry Fay told me, I can't send a Jew to hire Irish cops. So I'd go a day ahead of the band. Hi, Officer O'Shea, Kevin Fitzgerald, work for the Rolling Stones. What do we need? And at that time, Barry and Bill Graham, they revolutionized the tour industry because up until that time, till 69, every city had their own promoter. So there was a nut cutting every night in the accounting room of figuring out how many butts were in seats.
Right.
And so he said, I'm going to sell every ticket for the whole country. There'll just be one thing to the band. You'll just deal with me.
And that was Bill Graham.
Yeah. And Fay.
I was recalled him in San Francisco.
And Barry Fay, yeah.
Dollar Bill Graham.
And so revolutionized, Barry. So Barry was out of Denver, and so.
And who is this Barry Fay?
Barry Fay was a huge promoter at the time.
Okay.
And he went to the Stones and had the backing of Graham, and so it was his idea, and it revolutionized things. And so up until that time, it was every city. So I'd go a day ahead, hire the bouncers in that town, look at the hotel, figure out how we could get them from the airport to the hotel, and hotel to the venue back, and keep it safe, block off floors on the hotel, and tell the press we're staying at the Four Seasons when we were actually staying, at the Mirage someplace else, and you do misdirection things so you wouldn't have big crowds. And, John Lennon's people, we took pictures of the crowd in front of the hotel every morning. And if you'd see a guy that looked funky or had been, now you're in Cincinnati and that guy was in Cleveland the day before, and then it makes you jumpy. So we'd go and shake him down and touch him up and see if he had a gun, And
Now you were telling me that you didn't have the legal right to walk over and put him up against the wall, so you just kind of like, hey, buddy, how you doing?
The band wants to meet you. so we would just, the point of the
and there are very avid fans that will follow a tour.
Oh, the Grateful Dead.
And then there are, and I've done that with Elvis Costello. I saw him one night in Springfield and the next night on Cape Cod, and then, I've done that myself.
Yeah.
So, there is a difference between that and a squirrely guy talking to his wrist, and
a guy that's twitching and so.
And you were telling me that Mark David Chapman, who
he was there for
John
2
Lennon,
weeks. He was there
stood in front of the Dakota for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Security,
it makes
security doing its job.
It makes you sad. Somebody would have picked that up, but I think so. To be a little boy from Denver and get to go on the road with the Rolling Stones was like running away with the circus. It was just magic.
But I've always had this. It's funny that you say that because I've always had this observation. People often say, "I'm going to run away and join the circus," but the whole point of a circus is it travels from town to town. So really, you just have to wait for the circus to show up.
Oh, that's right. I never thought of it like that. So I had the advance. My job was the advance. Go ahead of the band. hire the bouncers from that town, weed out the Neanderthals, try to stay away from motorcycle gangs,
Right.
and rugby teams and boxing clubs and the local college football team, big gentle guys. That's what you wanted. In the business, you don't want bloody mouths. You want it nice,
Right.
and you want to get everybody in and have a nice time. They paid a lot for the ticket. So I do the advance and the cops in the beginning were a problem because a badge isn't a ticket. And my bouncers at the gates, a cop car would come through the gate with 50 of the police children in it. And
Sure.
So what I would do is go to the cops and say, listen, here's 2 tickets for every cop that's working. And, don't embarrass us,
Right.
You don't take advantage of us. And they do it, or here's $500 to the widows and orphans, and you do it in cash, and who knows what they did with it.
Sure,
but,
of course,
but,
right.
the Stones, support the
Wheels
police.
need to be greased.
Yeah. So, but that way, when the sound guy gets picked up for it, because he's got a joint in his pocket, you go, Officer O'Shea, I need that guy.
Yeah.
He's like,
yeah.
Kev's been nice to us, So the first.
So you're saying here that some people who worked for the Stones in the 70s
and 60s.
smoked pot.
Probably they did. I didn't see it.
Well, you heard it here first.
I didn't see any of that. But to show you just the kindness involved, so I'd do the advance, and then the night of the show, I'd have the front of the stage, and have the local bouncers there and a few of our guys. And so what would happen is they turn the lights off, and the kids all rush down onto the floor. So you're behind the barricade. So you can't have the wheelchair kids on the floor because they'll get knocked out of their chairs, and then you're behind. You can't help them, so it's not safe. So what they did was they stigmatized them even worse. They put them up and all together in a special area. So there's a kid who's all, has to be with all the kids. So it's not right. So every show, right before, Jagger would find me and say, "Where are they? Where are they?" And I knew what he meant, the wheelchair children. And so I'd say, "They're in 323. How many chairs?" 23 chairs. So I'm dating myself, but I would get 23 cassette tapes and 23 T-shirts and carry those, and we'd put a towel over his head and a hood, and we'd get him through the guts of the place so nobody would see him, and they'd pop out at 323, and he wouldn't stay and talk to him, but he'd run down every seat and put a cassette tape and a T-shirt in every kid's lap. "Hey, thanks for coming, baby. We love that you're here." Bam, 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 bam. And he didn't do it as a photo op. He didn't tell the press he was doing it. He just did it for him. And I worked for him for 25 years, and he did it every show. And it was, it's just, and we'd walk back and he'd go, "How come, Kevin? How come, they pay to see us play and sing, and there's so many other bands, and how come you got this big body, and you punch people for us, and we give you money?" And he goes, "We can never forget how lucky we are. We can never," and I never forgot that. He never forgot, that his gift, he was gifted, he was blessed.
Yes.
And I think that people can say what they want about the Rolling Stones, but, there's times like that where you just go, man, that's something.
Yeah. Well, there was also a weird story about how at the height of their powers, when the Beatles were touring, that disabled people would be brought to them backstage as if meeting them would cure them. like there was this weird, there was always like a line people would bring disabled people, and they just to meet the Beatles, and it was just this crazy aura about them, and they were always like, I'm just a musician, I'll happily meet you, but you're not going to get out.
Yeah. Well, they are just people, they are just people, and
it's important to remember that this, especially like the Stones and the Beatles, they were all working class kids from tough neighborhoods. Like they weren't posh. They didn't have a cushy life.
No. And they didn't forget that. They didn't forget where they came from.
Right.
Shepherd's pie.
Yes, I've had some shepherd's pie. But tell me how this whole thing started. You're an Irish kid in Denver. You graduate high school in 1969.
Yeah.
And that year you're also
security and then you're at Altamont.
Well, yeah, Faye did the whole tour.
And you're in the movie Gimme Shelter, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, everybody, Tony Funches, everybody, that wasn't our fault,
But I'm just trying to, I want to get to that, but I want to sort of set a historical, if I rent the movie Gimme Shelter, I can freeze a frame and see you, a younger Kevin Fitzgerald.
With dark hair.
With dark hair, no glasses.
No glasses.
When Saturday Night Live started for me, I also got really into comedy. And I was really into George Carlin as a kid. My mom and dad really liked George Carlin. He was one of the few things. I grew up in a very chaotic house, and I want to compare it to where you grew up, because you grew up, I think, a little ritzier than I did. We had 6 kids and 2 parents in in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom in Massachusetts. And there are a couple of things that everybody. So the house was always chaotic.
Right. It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. And a lot of people, and half of them at any given moment shit-faced. But there was a couple of things that would always shut everybody up. A Clint Eastwood movie, a James Bond movie, the Andy Griffith Show, The Three Stooges, or if George Carlin was on television.
Wow.
Because he used to be on the Sonny and Cher show a lot. And all of those things I grew to love.
Because it's solicited, quiet.
And it just was it's like, oh yeah, this is a soothing time. And I was just back home, and we're all adults now, and I'm the only political liberal in my family now. Everybody else is a diehard conservative, and those pressures are close to the surface because it was just before the election when I was home. But Andy Griffith was on, and everybody, same thing. Boom, everybody shut up, sat down, watched the Andy Griffith show. My dad and I were watching Gunsmoke, and there was a nun on Gunsmoke, and I was like, who is that nun? My dad goes, that's Helen Crump. And then an hour later, my brother came in and said, hey, Helen Crump was a nun on Gunsmoke today. Like, everybody's watching
it in different
everybody's watching the same thing. And so when SNL came on, I got into comedy, and Kirk Hammett got into music.
Right.
And you stayed. Did you always want to be an effects guy? Because what I find interesting is Tom Savini, big special effects guy from Pittsburgh, and you, big special effects guy from Pittsburgh, and you're both also connected to medical history.
Yeah.
Your dad is a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Tom was a
combat photographer.
Do you think those? I know for Savini, it has to be connected. It has to be connected.
I think so. Tom.
Let's then just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
A combat photographer in Vietnam.
Yes.
You've probably seen some stuff.
Some horrible stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't doubt for a second that somehow shaped him. The interesting thing about Tom, and if you compare myself with Tom, he loves movies and loves entertainment. Still to this day, I'm sort of fascinated. He still goes to the movies every weekend. He really loves it. He loves being transported into another world, and as do I, but he's still so dedicated to it. And I admire that a lot, because I've lost a little bit of that.
Sure. Because you're inside it.
I'm inside it, and with the kids and life.
Yeah.
But he is the most passionate guy. It's all about loving it. It's all about, man, you get into it, and that adrenaline rush that you get when you first read the script and you sit with the director and you start brainstorming ideas.
Right. Which is the most fun part.
The best part
of the entire process.
Any process is because it's literally like, these ideas are there, and there's a fan blowing the smoke away, and things coalesce in front of you. And when you're in the room with somebody who has a similar vision, it's like fireworks going off.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun, and it's so exciting. And when you're in the room with Tom and you work with Tom, that's what it's like. He brings that level of excitement to it, and he still does. Dude's 70 years old. I just went to Pittsburgh for his 70th birthday, and we had so much fun. And I think a lot of it was when you're in Pittsburgh, growing up there, not in Hollywood, like Howard Berger, who I own K&B with, he grew up in Hollywood. So when he was 12, 13 years old,
I didn't know he grew up in Hollywood.
He would go to Stan Winston's, and he would go to Tom Berman's, and he would go meet Rick Baker when he was like 12 years old, because his dad was owned a post-production sound studio.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So Howard had literally the perfect entrance to get into the business. And he always knew what he wanted to do.
And Howard must have known Bob Burns then as a child.
I don't know when he met Bob, but the thing about Howard is
the interesting thing. Go ahead.
That's what he always wanted to do. And for me, it was a little different because I didn't live in Hollywood. I didn't realize that there was a way to parlay this hobby, this interest, this fascination into a physical career. My dad is a physician, and, when I was young, they're like, you got the brains of the family, kid. You're going to be the doctor. And I went, oh, okay. I just assumed that's what I was going to do. But my interest in art, my interest in sketching and special effects, and, by that time in 77, 78, Fangoria came out.
Right.
And that changed things even more, because then you were
Fangoria is another magazine along the lines of Famous Monsters, but a lot more attuned to movies that were coming out at that time, and a lot more less focused on the classic horror movies of the 40s and 50s, and more focused on what was coming out then. And there's a lot of gore, splatter.
Right. It was between 1977 and 1986 was the heyday, because all of a sudden makeup effects became the stars of the movie. Didn't matter who the fuck was in the movie.
Famous Monsters was Playboy, Fangoria was Hustler.
Sure. Without a doubt. And you would stare at the pictures because there was a photo.
And often the photos would be equally graphic.
Yes. Exploding heads, werewolf transformations. That's a perfect analogy. But so for me, sort of being on that road to be a doctor.
Where beaver hunt.
And then, oh God, I just had a horrible.
I wonder if anybody has ever screamed, "They printed my beaver hunt."
Somebody somewhere had to have. But
Larry, are you sure you don't want to go with another name? No, that's good.
That was probably the name they settled on. They probably had 10 better names. They're like, no, that's way too much.
That's gross. We can't do that.
So oddly, Fangoria magazine, and I became friends with George Romero through my uncle, who just passed away. He was a local actor, and he was an actor in the Crazies, and that's how I met George.
Yes, because although you don't live in Hollywood, you're into Fangoria, you're into horror movies, and the George Romero, the preeminent horror director of the day,
lives 45 minutes away.
Lives 45 minutes away and is shooting in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
So there is a strange. It is the Hollywood of the Northeast in terms of horror movies.
Well,
at that time.
And then, I mean, if you really think about it, you had George Romero, you had Tobe Hooper, you had John Carpenter. Those three guys made one movie that completely redefined the horror landscape.
Yes.
Chainsaw, Night of the Living Dead, and Halloween. So
Night of the Living Dead is 68. But Chainsaw and Halloween are just a couple years apart.
I think Halloween.
Chainsaw was like 73, wasn't it?
Chainsaw was earlier.
Yeah, and then that's so they are spread out. Out.
But then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute. Meeting people in Hollywood, meeting people that not in Hollywood, but people that make movies, it's not as elusive as you would think.
Right.
It all of a sudden it sort of found myself on the front doorstep of meeting a guy who had literally single-handedly redefined the horror genre.
You get out of high school and you're in Denver.
Went to work for them, for Graham and Faye, and working the door at this place and boxing. Everybody boxed, Irish people. And my uncle was Larry Dugan was he was the boxing coach. So, everybody boxed and what the hell's wrong with you? Why didn't you box? So we did. And I think if you look at the history of boxing, the immigrant people are the ones doing it, probably. It's not the country club people. And so
it's an entry-level position.
Yeah, and so at that time, we boxed, and so Faye saw me box and hired us and put us. We were bands first with Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, A&M Records, and then the Flying Burrito Brothers, and then kind of made my bones, and then the Stones. So,
there's quite a difference, I'm assuming, between crowd work for Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and then you go to the Rolling Stones.
That's right. Crowd work was really different. After a P-Funk tour, I was working for Parliament Funkadelic. Graham came and said, "Hey, you got 3 months before you go back to school. I got another tour." I go, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's Billy Graham." I go, "Billy Graham, the Jesus guy?" And so he goes, "Yeah." And so the people would get the spirit, and rush the stage. Wah! And so we were used when they did that, to clothesline them. You put your arm out. So my brother, put his arm out, John, and put his arm out. Got this guy, thumped him in the Adam's apple, and the guy went down. And I go, "No, baby, no. They want him to go." He goes, "Look at this guy's eyes. He's on something." I go, "No, he's on the real thing. A clean windshield and a shoe shine.
He's on a clean windshield and a shoe shine."
That's amazing. And so they that was Bill Graham. It was amazing though. It was amazing. I think religion. Well, who knows?
Yeah, but. It's just
but the tours are different. The tours are different. I mean, there's different tours and there's different acts. Like, when the Stones come out, people scream. And I worked a lot with Kevin Nealon, who's so nice and so funny, and a wonderful person.
People don't know original Stones bassist.
And he asked me one time. He said, "You ever been starstruck?" And I said, yeah. And they gave the Rolling Stones bouncers to Elvis for that last tour, and when we met Elvis, I mean, the guy had an aura. When the Stones come out, people scream. And when we worked for Michael Jackson, people scream. But when Elvis came out, it got quiet.
And you're not talking about Elvis Costello.
Yeah, that. I mean,
you're talking about Elvis Presley.
Yeah, and that's Elvis. So we would run him onto the stage, and every night John would go, my brother would say, "That's Elvis." I mean, you couldn't believe it.
Well, and that was that story that you told me was what was so was a genuine moment, because again, I've known you for so long, but you're so modest about these stories, and then suddenly you were like, "Well, I was talking to Elvis." And you don't mean Costello.
I wasn't talking to him. He only spoke to me one time, and
But that's one more than most.
and he was like, "Do you have a gun?" Yeah. And we never carried guns. With the Stones, we never carried a gun. I mean, you wanted to diffuse things. You wanted,
Yeah, you don't want to escalate. You want to diffuse. Well, that's the brilliant thing about Donald Trump, is that he knows how to de-escalate a situation, not to inflame it.
Well, man, like you said, who knows what's going to happen? And so, so Elvis said, I said, "Yeah, I have a pistol," and he said, if somebody shoots me, I want you to kill him, because I don't want somebody sitting in a jail cell saying I'm the man what killed Elvis Presley, and like, what killed?
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, he was.
But
Greg Proops.
But the guy had an aura. I mean, it was just and who knows? They stopped the little tour we started because apparently, he died just a few months later. And
this was in
we stopped in 1977.
1977.
We stopped in April, and then he died in August, and it was just but for 90 minutes, for the show, he was like right there.
Here's the other thing.
The music would bring him out of it,
right? Also, this was when he was considered to be fat. This was fat Elvis. But when you look at the photos, by the standards of our modern day super fat, he's just a big guy. He's a little chunky, but he wasn't obese by modern obesity standards. He was just kind of a doughy dude.
Well, it's so sad what we think about what's fat. Being a veterinarian, 65% of the dogs I see are overweight, and being overweight, it doesn't, it's not just cosmetic. And our standard of what's fat is based on 15-year-old supermodels, right. watching the thing. And, everybody's thin when they're 15. That's it. We don't look much better than that.
And that, the cultural basis of that is, which is I find, you have girls in Casper, Wyoming, that are puking up lunch because they want to be thin. And they want to be thin because they want to be like a model they've seen who's thin. But this model is thin because a clothing designer in Milan wants his dress on a catwalk to not be interrupted by a human body. It's basically, he wants a coat hanger that knows how to walk.
She's an X-ray.
Yeah, she's an X-ray. and the way that we move down, the way that the cause and effect
and
of
the camera angle and the lighting.
Yeah.
And it's perfect,
If you look at sideshow, what do they call it? The midway. Sideshow midways from mid-century carnivals in the mid-century America. The attractions for the freak show were the fat lady, the tattooed guy, the hermaphrodite. That's now the line at Starbucks. It's like, that's what our culture has become. So Elvis at this point in 1977, and I want to talk about this, and then I have to chronologically move you back to Altamont and go forward, or there's no way we'll get lost in the labyrinth of your Gumpian life. He's fat but not super fat. He's taken a lot of drugs, but not recreationally. I think he's in a great deal of psychic pain, and he lives you were saying he lived in a bubble the size of your hand. What was Elvis comes into town? What has to happen when you bring Elvis to Portland, Oregon?
There weren't DVDs and players, VCRs, and there wasn't Infinity or on demand, and so he'd rent a movie theater, in the middle of the night and see the show, see the current movie, set up slot cars, and eating was a big thing. The poor guy had this thing to keep this ball rolling to support all these people.
Right.
And to keep it going. And it must be hard when these people start, their luster starts to fade, and then the next big thing comes, and then, they said, the animosity he had toward the Beatles and those guys. It must have been like when Frank Sinatra saw Elvis come.
It is, yeah.
And so.
You can only be the new thing once.
Yeah. Keith said, "You're not hip forever."
Yeah.
which is the coolest thing. But, other cultures, venerate the elderly.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see guys like when I bounced for Frank Sinatra, he said, you don't have anything, I don't have anything for you to do today, but I have a friend coming to town, he's old and I don't want him to get bumped. And it was George Burns. And,
right.
And he was so great, and he was so old, and it was part of the whole thing. And, my brother said, "Mr. Burns, you've seen it all. Vaudeville, radio, movies, television. What's the secret of comedy?" And George Burns goes, "Well, there's only 5 jokes. There's a current event joke where something's happening. Of course, you can talk about that.
He said, there's a sex joke where you're stooping somebody or somebody's stooping your wife. Don't do those. Those can be offensive. And he said, there's an ethnic joke where somebody is of a different thing. You're Irish. You can make any Irish joke. I'm Jewish. I can, you can't make a Jewish joke. I can't make. And then he said, and the fourth kind is the best kind, the self-deprecating kind where you make fun of yourself.
Right.
Like he goes, you wear glasses, so you can do any glasses joke in the world. And then my brother goes, well, what's the fifth kind? He goes, oh, boat axe. I go, boat axe? What's that boat axe? Oh, a guy on a cruise ship. He's got a guitar, a talking duck, a chimp or something.
Boat axe.
He called him boat axe. But he's kind of right. But he was old, and it was.
Yes, on the Ben Stiller show in 1992, we filmed at Hollywood Center Studios, and George Burns had an office on the floor where the show's offices were, and he would come in the morning. And he would sit at the desk and read the LA Times, and he would had crackers and like a tin foil of sardines. He'd eat sardines and crackers and read the LA Times and putter around, and then he'd go home at lunch, and we'd see him every morning. How are you, Mr. Burns? Come in every morning.
He was the only guy when he was getting dressed. He wore sock garters.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
Sexiest thing in the world to a woman, by the way.
His legs were impossibly white. They were like alabaster with no veins. They looked like white marble, and he would put his shoes and socks on, boxer shorts, his tux cummerbund and shirt, and the jacket, but not his pants, and walk around.
Yeah, Jerry Lewis, all those guys.
He didn't want to. He goes, I don't want to
crease the pants. Jerry Lewis and all those guys.
I don't want to get a wrinkle.
All those guys, they would not put on their pants until just before they went on stage.
But they were so big, he could pull them on over his shoes. And I was like amazed,
Yeah.
But he was so nice, and he goes, hey Fitzgerald. You know how to sing? And I go, no, I don't know how to sing. He goes, I'd rather sing than eat, but most people would rather hear me eat. He had jokes like that all the time. It was so nice, and I used to be a cab driver until I got tired of people talking behind my back. And and we were dying, we were just dying. And
I didn't know him and Sinatra were friends, but that.
Yeah. And he didn't want him to get, he was so nice. I got to open that last summer that Joan Rivers was alive, opened for her for 10 Cities for Jewish Family Services. And she was
because you're also, people forget, you're also a comedian.
and so she was so nice to people.
Yeah, Joan was a
people
sweetheart.
Would come up,
Joan was a sweetheart.
and she'd talk to him, and she had time for everybody. And Keith, Keith would always ask the person who was being introduced where he's from and what he did, and the guy would just talk about himself and then leave. And Keith said, people enjoy talking about themselves.
Oh, I told
And then they go in and say, that guy's the greatest guy in the world. And he hadn't said one word.
That's what I tell my daughters. I go, you want to make friends? Ask people about themselves and listen. That's the secret to having a lot of friends.
For what you wanted to do, if you thought that you wanted to do it at that time, it was like you were a singer-songwriter and you lived near Bob Dylan.
Yeah. No, it wasn't like there was a writer there. It wasn't like there was a famous composer or anything. It was a guy who made fucking horror movies.
Yeah.
Who was right there. And
was still making them right there.
Yes, still. Yeah. And so, lo and behold, we struck up a friendship. I was 15. And he was a big, he's obviously a movie buff. Just talking about my parents for a second, my parents, when you said James Bond and Clint Eastwood, dude, I saw every one of those movies in the theater. When those movies came out, From Russia with Love, Good and the Bad and the Ugly, and those movies came out, you went to the theater with your parents.
Yeah.
And you sat through those movies. Good and the Bad and the Ugly, almost 3 hours. I had no frickin' idea what the hell that movie was about. But, and then they would re-release movies. So 2001 would come out, and then the next year they'd re-release it, and we would go. We'd go to Benihana's for fucking dinner.
That sounds like heaven on earth.
And then we would go see 2001. The joke was every year Mother's Day, we would be like, Mom, what do you want to do for Mother's Day? And my dad would be like, we're going to Benihana's and we're going to see 2001.
Yeah, that's a terrible movie to bring a kid to.
Horrible. Until I was 30, I didn't know what the hell the movie was about.
That can be a slog if you're not pharmaceutically enhanced. There's my friend. You just reminded me of a really funny story. We had to really pester to get taken anywhere. I have a double story. My dad really didn't take us to the movies once, but when I broke my collarbone as a kid, he took me to the hospital the minute the hockey game was over. That's not a joke. But my friend Andy Gordon, a really funny comedy writer here in Los Angeles, tells a story about he was a giant James Bond fan since he was a child. And his dad, when he was a kid, took him to see Diamonds Are Forever. And when the gun barrel came out at the beginning and the music, he got so excited, he fainted.
Oh, my God.
He fainted for I was up like 10 seconds and then it came back. But I just got so overwhelmed. I was like, ah.
Wow.
He was probably 10 or 11 years old.
I mean, but those, that.
And I'll put those.
The best.
Yeah, and if you're flipping the channels and they come on today, you can't not watch them. You just put them on. And it is incredibly comforting. It's so great to have that thing, like if I'm writing and I need to take a mental break every hour or so, our friend Steve Niles has a great Tumblr account called Arcane Images. It's one of many Tumblr, but it's just photos of old movies, a photo of mine. And I'll just go there for 5 minutes, take a little sponge bath for your brain, and then just. So, did George Romero give you your first job?
He did. He did indeed. They had offered me a job on Creepshow.
And you're how old?
I was 17, and I was about to go to college because, of course, to be a doctor.
Right.
I was still on that path. I had visited the set of Creepshow a bunch of times and watched them building Fluffy and the Crate episode. I walked around on the sets and stuff. So
and that was Savini, right?
It was with Tom. That's when I met Tom. I met George first.
Right.
And then I became friends with Tom subsequently.
It's so funny. Just this morning, do you know Ken Reed?
Yeah.
I'm having dinner with Ken tonight, and Ken and Matt Weinhold. And Ken Reed on his Instagram this morning posted the photo of the Stephen King dummy with the mold growing on its face.
Oh, Jordy Verrill.
Yeah, he just happened to post that just this morning. It's a small world.
Very
So you go to the set, you meet Savini.
So I go to the set. That's when I met Tom for the first time because I had been friends with George. And they had kind of said, hey, man, do you want a job? And I'm like, what kind of job? I'm like, I don't know, maybe like security at the like work at the studio as a production assistant or security or whatever. I don't even think they knew. They just, George just kind of took a liking to me and was like, hey, you seem like a conscientious kid.
You're a good kid.
You're around a lot, so we may as well pay you $200 or something. And I didn't take the job because I was like,
no, that's not how this story goes.
No, I'm about to go away to college, and thank you very much. And I actually recommended a friend of mine for the job, who I don't believe got it because I don't think at the time they were like, we don't really want somebody else.
We just
wanted you.
Yeah.
And if you're not available, and so we stayed in touch, and I go through 3 years of college, pre-med, studying biology and organic chemistry and getting pretty good grades.
It's just at
Westminster College. Mm-hmm. It was an hour north of Pittsburgh, where Wes Craven evidently taught for a short time. So we're, every summer I would intern at a different hospital. Getting into medical school around the time that I was trying to get in was probably the most rigorous time because a lot of people from other countries everybody was sort of coming to the United States to go to medical school. That was sort of like the big kind of glamour job. That was the most lucrative at the time. It's like, oh yeah, you got to be a doctor because there's a lot of money. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor because my dad has a kidney practice and I would take over the practice, and it just that's what my parents told me we were doing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So it comes up summer of 1984, and I was working at a hospital, and every day I would intern with a different surgeon or a different department. And I called George and I said, "Hey man, what are you doing? Can I come down and let's go grab lunch?" So I went down to his office in downtown Pittsburgh, and we went to lunch. And he said, "Oh, by the way, we just got a green light to shoot Day of the Dead. Do you want a job?" And I immediately, without even blinking, went, "Yes." So I got in my car. I was driving home.
Because if you'd stopped to think about it, you wouldn't have said yes.
I don't even know. I just went, yes. Probably the idea of, okay, you don't, not only does this not happen once.
No, that's a primal scream.
It never happens twice.
Yeah, and it never happens twice. And it's also one of those things where your gut went, yeah, I do.
Yeah. I went, yes. I drove home and I remember going upstairs in my parents' bedroom and saying, "Hey, so I just got offered a job in Day of the Dead. I'm going to take a semester off school, but I'm going to go back in January. I'm going to finish. So you don't have anything to worry about." And they were like, "Okay." Like they didn't blink.
Oh, wow. Well, they might have expected it because everybody does that.
Yeah, but
also they just sound like really cool parents.
They were great, but I don't really know.
Because Rick Baker has very similar, like his parents were so supportive of his desire to do what he did.
Yeah. I really don't. I should have asked them, like, at that moment, did they literally go, "Oh, shit."
Right.
Without me knowing. Because I kind of turned around, "Great, thanks," and turned around and walked out. I would love to have been in that room 5 seconds after I left to see if they went, "Oh, there goes that one. He's gone."
Right.
And then I called Savini. And at that point, I had been...
What was the job that he offered you?
He didn't offer me. He just said, "Do you want a job?"
Do you want a job? Interesting.
So I called Savini and said, "Hey."
He wanted you to be the star.
Yes. I could have been
whoever
Bub.
the star. Yeah, whoever the star of Day of the Dead was.
But so I called Savini immediately because between Creepshow and Day of the Dead was 3 years. So during that 3 years, from 81 to 84, we got to be friends. And so immediately I called Tom and said, "I just got hired on Day of the Dead. I'm going to be your assistant." And he was like, "Great." So I called George back and said, "Listen, I'm going to work in Savini's department." And they were like, "Perfect." I think that's what they had wanted me to do anyway. The thing about that I, of course, realized later was their intent was have somebody help coordinate Tom's department. Let Tom be free to devise
do
all
what
the
he
effects,
does.
do what he does, and not have to worry about ordering materials, buying foam latex.
Boy, and that's one thing that you've learned, and I have since learned, that when I'll speak for myself, that you're a writer and you get to the point in your writing where you've created a show that's on. And you think, great, now I can write. No, and you're also, somebody said this, you're also going to manage a department store. And, because the responsibilities of running a show are...
And plan a wedding.
Yeah, you're going to plan a wedding, manage a department store. It's like, so you can't, after a certain point, I know where I am right now. It's like the scripts that I'm going to write for season 2, I'm writing now because in a couple of months I'm not going to be able to write anything.
Right. You won't have time.
I won't have time. So it's funny. You work really hard as a makeup artist, and then you get to the point where you're running the department, and the last thing you can do is actually do makeup.
Do your job.
Yeah. That was Dan Strepak was the head of the makeup department at Fox and spent all of his time running the makeup department at Fox, which is why he had to bring in John Chambers for Planet of the Apes, but you all know that.
Yes, we all know that.
So Elvis Presley, you and your brother are traveling with him. It's 1977. It's a very interesting time in the country. It's 1977 was really the end of the 60s and the peak of the 70s. Like there was a lot of 60s culture still going on in 1977. People still have really long hair. People are still smoking a lot of pot, and the 60s didn't end on December 31st, 1969. They bled into the 70s, and then this bizarre decade that was the 70s started in 73,
funny decade,
74.
a hybrid decade. To me, the 60s stopped at Altamont. The summer
prior
of love,
to 1970.
the summer of love and everything. It was December of '69, and it had been Woodstock earlier. But then the 70s got different. We ended
let's talk about let's stop and talk about Altamont, because you were at Altamont. The casual person that's even aware of it thinks that the Hells Angels murdered somebody, and that was it. And it's much different.
It's a whole different story.
Yeah, it's a very different story. It's actually quite the opposite. But so, was that your first gig with the Stones?
That was the end of the tour. It was supposed to be in Golden Gate Park, and it was supposed to be this free concert. And at the end of the tour, the '69 tour, the tour started in Fort Collins, and it started here in Colorado, and they hadn't played live for a while, and so.
And it was the Rolling Stones, the Jefferson Airplane, and the Flying Burrito Brothers
and the Grateful Dead.
So was that was the Altamont?
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, because the Stones weren't at Woodstock, and they wanted to have a Woodstockian experience. Is that?
And they wanted to give some back to the fans, and so I think the giant festivals are maybe coming back in with Coachella and some of the things, but I mean, there were so many of them then. There were Sunday, and 20 bands, and they put these weird bands together to try and see if they could pull the most people. So you'd have Marshall Tucker and the Allman Brothers and Great Southern with Dickie Betts and Charlie Daniels and Hart. And you go, what?
Yeah. The comedy stylings of Red Skelton.
And so there were these giant things, the US Festival, and
now touring is coming back because thanks to the internet, it's the only way musicians can make money.
But in those years, you toured, like we were talking last night, about pushing your new album. So people could see it, and you play the new album, and so that's changed now because there aren't really albums, I still say records, but I'm old, and when my nieces come over, I play the music, and they go, they call my house Old Town.
Old Town?
Yeah, but it's like my dad. My dad would get up in the morning and he'd have the boxer shorts on, and he'd be helping my mother dust on Saturday mornings, and he'd be snapping his fingers and playing Frank Sinatra and going, "Now this really swings." And my brother would be behind him making a square with his fingers, But now when you listen to it, it does really swing. But you can't like the music of
your
the generation before.
When you're that age.
And so I listen to. I try and listen to everything and keep current, but you gravitate toward what you are. And it's not believable. It's just like we worked for Earth, Wind and Fire for my friend Butch Grayer, and he had grown up with us and was a boxer, and a tough guy, and he hired us. The McCusker brothers, my cousins, my brothers, and so he fired us and said that from 1976. He said the Irish are too violent. Never hire you again. 2002, he called me up and he goes, "I need you. I need the McCusker brothers. I need your brothers. I need Fingers Ryan, all the boys." And so I go, "Well, you got a bloodbath. What do you got?" And he goes, "The Wu-Tang Clan. You're going out with the Wu-Tang." So 2002.
I would just think that the worst possible thing you could do to not incite violence is for there be a line of pasty white guys in front of the Wu-Tang Clan.
Well, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. That's how I got on with I went out with a band, and they were a husband and wife, a black band. You probably can't say the name; you'll be sued. Doing your podcast sued. But anyway, they broke up.
I can cut it out.
They got divorced.
Peaches and Herb?
No. They were called Cameo.
Oh yeah, I remember Cameo.
Dancing in the Sheets.
Yeah.
And they got divorced right the first day of the tour. Boom. So here I am. I'm in Cincinnati. I have no money. I have no way. Call up Graham. What do I do? Get to Cleveland. Another black band's going out, and then we'll get you and we'll get you go in. And it's the George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic. And so I walk in. I don't know George, and George is sitting in the hotel down in the lobby. I'm supposed to meet this guy, George, And so. And he says, "Oh, they didn't tell us you was white." So they put me right in the front, and at that time, the Parliament Funkadelic was a black experience. The Mothership Connection, it was young black kids, and now it's all white college kids, And man, it was so much fun, and they liked it. That you realized, you'd been thumping heads already,
right.
and it was no different. Black, white, and an equal opportunity thumper.
Yeah.
And so then.
Thumper.
So he said, "You have any more of you at home?" Yeah, I heard my brother John, and so they were so cool. They would jerry curl their bouncers, their hair, but we wanted to look cool, so we didn't tie our hair back or get haircuts. We would just let it like Braveheart, and put like a chicken bone in it or a feather, John put a mirror in his hair, and the cop came and said, "There's a guy over there that says he got hit by a guy with a mirror in his hair. You have a guy with a mirror in his hair?" No. And then so my brother came around the corner. He's got this mirror. That's cool. We have this mirror in my head. It's cool.
I love when women put a feather in their hair because it gives them that "I just got hit by a bird" look.
Yeah. It was great. So we worked with them, and I think, music is music, and it crosses, like comedy, it crosses color lines, I don't think there's anything that says, this is a black thing you don't understand, and this is a white thing you don't understand. Exclusivity, leave someone out.
Yeah.
is so wrong. I think it cuts across. In comedy, when we do our job, an old guy and a young guy are both laughing, and a white guy and a black guy, a woman and a man. I mean, it cuts across like molten, it cuts to the core of it, and it's the Irish say the shortest distance between 2 points is the truth, and the comedy is the truth. If you get the joke down to its basic thing, there's a kernel of truth in there. So I think, that's the same thing with the music. It was, you can't do it like that. Like we were flying to, my cousin Tommy looked at me and had a thing about the Wu-Tang. We were on the airplane, and they gave us $1,500 a show for 10 cities and to teach their bouncers, because what happened was they were a loose confederation of these rappers, and they each had their own entourage. So each had a bouncer and his brothers and sisters and his wife and girlfriend and all their babies and then all their friends. So each guy had 30 people.
It was quite literally a clan.
So there's 300 people backstage. Right. So you can't have that. For the Stones, it's like a clean backstage, just wife and babies and, some managers. And then the party afterward, the VIP party you'd have, but you couldn't have them in the way. So we're flying there, and Tommy says, he's looking at the Wu-Tang pamphlets. He goes, "Kev, who he fighting? Oriental Negroes? Who he fighting?" The Oriental Negroes,
So you and your brother have been bouncing for a while and doing security, I guess we'd call it.
Yeah, my cousins. Yeah.
So, and you're with the Stones tour in '69, and you're at Altamont Speedway in Southern California, and it's a big show. It's Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, Flying Burrito Brothers, and the Rolling Stones. You get to Altamont Speedway. How does that day work for a day in the life of a Rolling Stone security guy in the late '60s?
Well, what you have to understand is there's two kinds of security. There's personal security, where you're attached to the person and to protect the person. And there's venue security, where you're trying to keep the place moving quickly, get the people in from outside safely, get them in their seats, make sure the aisles are okay for the fire marshals, make sure that they don't serve beer in glass bottles, that kids drop the bottles and they're dancing in the glass.
Right.
You got your medical people. You're in touch with the cops. We got enough police. The police aren't very visible to inflame the crowd. So that's how kind of like a security, T-shirt security, where you would have people not in a police uniform go into the crowd. If the cops go in the crowd, no matter what the guy in the crowd did, the people are on the guy's side.
Right.
Even if he was throwing bottles or lighting firecrackers and dropping them in the crowd. So what happened with Altamont was it was already lost before we got there. We didn't get there till 4 p.m, and Jagger got thumped by a fan walking from the airport, from the helicopter through the crowd. It was just the Angels had put up their bikes around the stage, You know,
and this is the Hells Angels of security because Jerry Garcia said, let's hire the Hells Angels.
But they always had, you know, the San Francisco, the Dead, and to a lesser extent, the Jefferson Airplane had worked with them always, you know, and who better probably to do security than those guys, you know.
Right.
But the problem was, by the point in the day, they were more screwed up than the crowd.
Right.
You know, if you watch the movie and look at the eyes on them, you know, and you know, Marty Ballin got punched in the face. You know, they were on the stage more than you couldn't even see the burritos. You know.
Yeah. Now, was it a fan that punched Marty Ballin in the face, or was it one of the Hells Angels?
An angel, because he was telling him to shut up. Hey, look, you know.
Yeah.
And Paul Kent was like, they just hit my singer. You know, what are they doing?
Right. No, it was Grace Slick, wasn't it? Could security not punch our singer?
Yeah. And Canton was good, saying we're going to stop playing and. So by that time, it was evening. The Stones were going to come on and came on a little bit late and try and, you know, get it a little bit more under control. And so my boss, Jimmy Callahan, Tony Funches, you know, the famous Tony Funches, you know, he was my boss. He paid me. He was he was a legend, and it was, you know, not about Bloody Mouths and about, you know, bouncer tricks and you know, the nonsense question and the things that
tell the story of the nonsense question.
Well, the nonsense question is, if a guy's going crazy and he's, you know, going apeshit, and sometimes if you ask him a question, he'll have to stop what he's doing. He's choking somebody or whatever, you know. Yeah. Hey, where'd you park? What? And just as he looks at you, then somebody else can thump him or you can thump him, and then so you have little codes, like, you know what you're going to do in the day. And what we wanted was no bloody mouths. You didn't want lawsuits. You didn't want, you know, deaths. People are paying a lot of money at that time even for tickets, and you want their thing to be an enjoyable thing. You know, I was working for the Grateful Dead, and this kid came up to me in Philadelphia and really nicely dressed, and he goes, "Can you help me? Can you come and see?" And I go where his seats are, and the guy in the seats next to him is banging his girlfriend under a blanket. You're right there in the crowd. And I say, sir. And he goes, no, we always make love when we hear this song, you know. And well, what if you were in, you know, the supermarket and it comes on? What do you do? You know, but that kind of thing in the crowd is so. The crowds.
That's the guy that came to you, basically, people were fucking next to him, and he said, "I'm gonna tell."
Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't know. Most people pay $3.59 an hour to watch.
Yes, there's an air about hot coffee that's hard to resist. Full-bodied, refreshing hot coffee makes any time a pleasant interlude. Won't you have some now?
Casper is an online retailer of premium mattresses for a fraction of the average price. Casper is revolutionizing the mattress industry by cutting the cost of dealing with resellers and showrooms and passing that savings directly to the consumer. Designed, developed, and assembled in the USA, Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. With over 20,000 reviews and an average of 4.8 stars, it's quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. It combines memory foams to create an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink and just the right bounce. And all Casper mattresses are made in America. Time magazine named it one of the best inventions of 2015, an award-winning mattress that won't disappoint. Try Casper for 100 nights, risk-free in your own home. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. Free shipping and returns to the U.S. and Canada. Get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting Casper.com/Dana and using the promo code Dana. He was born Wolf Volodya Krahonka in Germany in 1931. His father died 2 days after he was born. As if that wasn't bad enough, let's remember that 1931 in Germany was a terrible time and place to be born Jewish. In 1939, he was sent to an orphanage in France to escape the Holocaust. After the fall of France, he and a group of other Jewish children undertook an arduous journey across Europe and escaped to America, without their parents. Grahonka was not 10 years old. His mother would not join him, for she was imprisoned at Auschwitz, where she was murdered by the Nazis. Grahonka settled in the Bronx and was taken in by a foster family. Oddly, having risked his very young life to escape the Nazis, he was frequently called one and beaten up for it because of his thick German accent. For 6 months, he sat in front of a mirror, practicing speaking with a proper Brooklyn, Bronx, New York accent. And he nailed it. He also changed his name to sound more American, flipping through the phone book and finding a name that sounded enough like Grahonka to satisfy him, but was certainly not as foreign sounding. And so, Wolf Grahonka became Bill Graham. Later in life, he would claim to have no real memories of his life in Europe.
Those awful years in the beginning of the Nazis in Germany. What do you recall of those years? Anything? Were you much too young?
No, I've never known what to do about that. From the day that I came here, I was 11. I have total amnesia for the first 9 years of my life. I remember nothing.
Graham joined the Army, fought in Korea, won the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, and upon getting out of the Army, worked as a maitre d' at a hotel in the Catskills. In the early 1960s, Graham moved to San Francisco and befriended a radical theater group called the San Francisco Mime Troupe. After a member of the group was arrested on an obscenity charge, Graham helped organize a benefit concert to help cover the group's legal fees. The event was a big success, and Graham began promoting other concerts with a local promoter named Chet Helms. Instead of combing the Bay Area for available venues, Graham wanted to find a small group of reliable, available locations. He found exactly what he was looking for in a dance hall, located at the intersection of Fillmore and Geary in San Francisco, formerly known as the Majestic Hall, having been renamed the rather unremarkable Fillmore Auditorium. Graham's taking control of the Fillmore coincided with the explosion of the hippie movement, the counterculture, and psychedelia. In what, between the years of, say, 1965 and 1970, became known as the California Sound. It was headquartered in San Francisco. The neighborhood known as the Haight-Ashbury became the heart of that scene, and Bill Graham's Fillmore provided the soundtrack. Among the many acts that played at the Fillmore or called it home were, of course, the Grateful Dead, who played there some 51 times in those years, the Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, the Doors, Jimi Hendrix, the Byrds, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Santana, Frank Zappa's The Mothers of Invention, the Allman Brothers Band, Creedence Clearwater Revival. From Britain came The Who, Cream, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. They all performed at the Fillmore. Graham also featured Lenny Bruce, Miles Davis, Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding. The list goes on and on and on and on. So successful was the Fillmore that Graham opened another one in New York City in 1968, the famous Fillmore East. In addition to providing a performance space for everyone who is anyone, the Fillmore East also gave the world the Joshua Light Show, created by Joshua White, the psychedelic light show that became ubiquitous with images of rock concerts in the late 60s. Graham did not become successful by accident. He was a brutally good businessman. Early in his career, Graham, along with another promoter named Chet Helms, produced a concert by the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. Graham saw an opportunity. So, bright and early the next morning, he called the band's manager, Albert Grossman, who, fun fact, also managed Bob Dylan, and secured the exclusive rights to promote the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. He didn't mention this to his partner, Chet Helms, who was pissed off. But Graham argued that there was no way Helms would have even found out about the deal unless he had called Grossman and tried to get the same deal for himself. His advice to Helms was, "Next time, get up earlier." Bill Graham was one of the most successful and certainly one of the most famous rock promoters in the country. And his crowning jewels were San Francisco's Fillmore Auditorium and New York's Fillmore East. But in 1971, he closed them.
They were huge successes. Why'd you close them down, Bill?
That's because I wasn't happy.
Graham did eventually find his way back into promotion and, along the way, revolutionized it. In 1973, he promoted the largest outdoor concert in Watkins Glen, New York. 600,000 paying audience members. Woodstock was 500,000, and it ended up being free. In 1975, he hosted the Snack Benefit Concert in San Francisco's Kezar Stadium, the proceeds going to fund after-school programs that were cut by the San Francisco Unified School District. For those of you who have seen the film Dirty Harry, Kezar Stadium is where Harry shoots the Scorpio Killer and then steps on his leg for a while. Graham also produced the US Festival with Steve Wozniak and the American shows for Live Aid. Some of his practices were a little tough. In 1980, his company, Bill Graham Presents, teamed up with Bass Tickets and made Bass the exclusive ticket seller for all Bill Graham Presents concerts. And together, they drove all of the smaller ticket sellers out of business. And then, after Bass changed its name to Ticketmaster, they started jacking up ticket prices to, well, Ticketmaster levels. This practice came under fire first from Pearl Jam and secondly from the California State Senate. Sadly, Bill Graham died in a helicopter crash in October of 1991 after flying back from the Shoreline Amphitheater, which he helped create. He was securing Huey Lewis's participation in an upcoming benefit concert to benefit the people whose homes were destroyed in the recent Oakland fires. His company, Bill Graham Presents, changed its name to Live Nation and is still going strong today. Now, it's rare that I do one of these little middle pieces, as I call them, about someone I've actually met, but in this case, I have. And I should probably tell you the story. It's not much, but I started my stand-up career in Boston, but I moved to San Francisco soon after, and San Francisco is very much my stand-up comedy hometown. And if you lived in San Francisco when Bill Graham was alive, and you were a performer, well, you were going to bump into Bill Graham. One night I was at the San Francisco Punchline, which Bill Graham Productions owned, and I was sitting at the bar watching the show, and in walked Bill Graham and sat down pretty much next to me, and we were just sitting there watching the show. It was late, and the comedian on stage, who will go nameless, was in a pretty indulgent mood and was engaging in a little practice we like to call walking the room, where a comedian tries to see how indulgent he can be in the hopes that he will walk the entire audience before he leaves the stage. And this particular comedian was doing a very good job. And at one point, after a particularly large table got up and left, Bill Graham turned to me and said, "Nice parade." Great story if it ends there, right? Well, it does. But it needn't end there for you. Why not pick up Bill Graham's excellent autobiography, Bill Graham Presents: My Life Inside Rock and Out. And in keeping with some of the other events discussed in this episode, pick up Hunter S. Thompson's Hell's Angels. It is hilarious and crazy. Well, it's Hunter S. Thompson. Or maybe you haven't seen Dawn of the Dead yet. And if so, shame on you. Or read The Evil Dead 2 Companion. And yet somehow we're still speaking. For all of these and more, clickety-clack your keyboard to DanaGould.com. Click on our Amazon banner and shop away. You get what you want, and for no extra charge, we get a couple extra beans to keep the lights on here. Also on the homepage of DanaGould.com, You'll see options to donate to the show or subscribe through PayPal. Every cent goes back into the show. And please know we appreciate what, if anything, you can do. But that's not all. You can also visit our store at comedyfilmnerds.com for Bevilacqua Heating and Air Conditioning t-shirts, Dana Gould Hour t-shirts, signed vinyl copies of Funhouse, Let Me Put My Thoughts in You, and I Know It's Wrong, signed CDs, signed DVDs, signed hams, posters, shampoo, all signed by me. And just in time for your pre-apocalypse entertainment storage facility. And all available at store.comedyfilmnerds.com. After pimping out all of that bullshit, I'm hungry. This episode of the Dana Gould Hour has been brought to you by Blue Apron. Not all ingredients are created equal. Fresh, high-quality ingredients taste better and are better for you. So it's important to know where your food comes from. I recently took it upon myself to buy Blue Apron. And you know what? It's amazing. And I can barely boil water. For less than $10 a meal, Blue Apron delivers seasonal recipes along with pre-portioned ingredients to make delicious, home-cooked meals. Blue Apron knows that when you cook with incredible ingredients, you make incredible meals. So they set the highest quality standards for their community of artisanal suppliers, family-run farms, fisheries, and ranchers. Whether it's Japanese ramen noodles, wild-caught Alaska salmon, or heirloom tomatoes, Blue Apron is bringing you the best. Thanks again to Blue Apron for supporting this podcast. And check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/DGH.
Barbecue, barbecue, barbecue. Our barbecue is prepared especially for you.
The image of America in the years immediately following World War II is one of quiet conformity. Dirty-faced GIs coming home to their clean young wives to start clean young lives, living in nice quiet homes, on nice quiet streets, and nice quiet towns. The, shall we say, Leave It to Beaverized view of America in the late 1940s and early 1950s. But hey, surprise, surprise, underneath the surface, things weren't so neat and tidy. To begin with, a lot of these guys came home from World War II with profound and overwhelming cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. Though it wasn't called that back then. In fact, it wasn't called anything, really. By and large, people didn't know post-traumatic stress disorder was even a thing. Which is why a lot of those dirty-faced GIs came home, cleaned up, got married, got jobs, started having kids, and spent the next couple of decades quietly smoking and drinking themselves to death. But a small percentage of those veterans did not conform so readily. Some dropped out, wrote poetry, and became beatniks. And others, like William Faulkner, found inner peace creating outer chaos on a motorcycle. Now, there were motorcycles before World War II. Early models date back to the late 1800s. And by the 1930s, there were, dotted across America, motorcycle racing clubs. One such club, based in Southern California, was called the 13 Rebels. William Faulkner, or as he was so lovingly known, Wino Willie, was a charter member of the 13 Rebels. Wino Willie Faulkner rode and raced with the club until World War II, whereupon he did his patriotic duty by joining up and serving on a bomber crew in the South Pacific. When he returned home, slipping into a quiet life in a sleepy suburb just was not on the menu. He resumed his membership in the 13 Rebels, but was soon kicked out when he crashed a motorcycle race. Quite literally. There was a professional race on a professional track, but Willie wasn't impressed with the riders on that particular day, so he drove through the fence from the street and, let's use the word, merged with the other racers. Booted from the 13 Rebels, who I guess weren't that rebellious, Wino Willie hooked up with some other disenchanted motorcycle enthusiasts, many of them veterans, having a hard time settling into their sedate post-war box. They formed a new motorcycle club, the Booze Fighters. Contrary to the natural assumption, booze fighting does not mean getting drunk and getting into a fight. It's an old expression for a hangover, or fighting the booze. All was well and good with the Booze Fighters until the now infamous Hollister Riot of 1947. As early as the 1930s, the quietly named American Motorcyclists Association, AMA, held an annual weekend rally in the sleepy little town of Hollister, California. But after World War II, with veterans like Wino Willie swelling the number of bikers, the rally suddenly grew exponentially larger. In 1947, 4,000 bikers rode into Hollister, California, which only had about 4,000 people living there to begin with. The city of Hollister was totally unprepared to have its population instantly doubled, especially by a group that was comprised completely of drunken people on motorcycles. It's not hard to imagine what happened next. There was some public drunkenness, some moving violations, and some minor property damage. Some at the hands of Wino Willie himself. All in all, it wasn't that terrible. It was more like a rowdy spring break with motorcycles than a gas-fueled insurrection, but it got written up in Life magazine that way, under the lurid title, Cyclists Terrorize Town. Fed to a public that was already being doused with a daily dose of paranoia that communists were coming and visibly invading their towns, brainwashing their children, adding fluoridation to the water supply, the sensationalized version of the Hollister Riot began a series of events that would forever turn motorcycle clubs into biker gangs in the eyes of the American public. Specifically, the weekend rally was turned into a short story called Cyclists Raid, which then became a film, The Wild One, starring Marlon Brando, then at the height of his initial fame.
Hey, Johnny, what are you rebelling against?
What do you got?
But the most famous biker gang in America is undoubtedly the Hells Angels. Founded in Northern California by a different group of disaffected World War II veterans. The Hells Angels, in fact, take their name from a World War II fighter squadron that operated out of China and Burma. Over time, they eclipsed all other American motorcycle gangs in terms of fame and notoriety. How? Location, location, location. Their Northern California roots made them the primary motorcycle club in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when the counterculture of the late 1960s started to gain national attention, the Hells Angels gained attention with it, assuming the mantle of, if it's not too contradictory a term, hippie muscle. In 1966, Roger Corman produced The Wild Angels, a cinematic descendant of The Wild One, to be sure, where the Hells Angels were portrayed as, well, according to the poster, their credo is violence, their god is hate. The trailer claimed they hunt in packs, like wolves on wheels.
They're wild and no angels, law-defying, getting their kicks from violence and torture.
Biker films became huge in the exploitation market, with titles like The Glory Stompers, Born Losers, Hells Angels on Wheels, which starred a scrappy young B-movie actor and Roger Corman regular named Jack Nicholson, who would then go on to appear in the godfather of all biker movies, Easy Rider, the film that made him a star. Born Losers was the film that introduced Tom Laughlin's aforementioned karate-kicking Native American vengeance-hander-outer, Billy Jack. And if you haven't seen it, you have only yourself to blame. But it was another film, a documentary, that cemented the Hells Angels' reputation. Gimme Shelter, the 1970 documentary of the ill-fated free concert at Altamont Speedway, intended as sort of a West Coast, Rolling Stones-led answer to Woodstock. The free concert at Altamont Speedway featured such late 60s giants as the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, the Flying Burrito Brothers, and of course the Rolling Stones. The deal was the Rolling Stones hired the Hells Angels as stage security instead of, professional stage security. The other part of the deal was they paid them not in money, but in beer. And I'm assuming it was paid up front. Things at the concert grew tense. The Hells Angels, acting as security, got a little rougher than normal security, and at one point, one of them knocked Jefferson Airplane guitarist Marty Balin completely unconscious, causing the Grateful Dead to leave the gig before their set. During the Rolling Stones set, during the song Under My Thumb, a shoving match erupted between an audience member named Meredith Hunter and a Hells Angel named Alan Passaro. Hunter, the audience member, pulled a gun, and Passaro stabbed him to death in front of the Rolling Stones on film. Passaro was tried for murder but was acquitted. Hunter did draw a pistol and aim it towards the stage. Passaro quite justifiably claimed he was doing his job, but it didn't, or did, depending on your perspective, do a ton for the Hells Angels image. But that is how the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in 1914 triggered the events that led to World War I, which resulted in the economic devastation in Germany that led to the rise of National Socialism, which resulted in the Nazi Party's leader, Adolf Hitler, becoming Chancellor of Germany in 1933, which led to a series of events that later became known as World War II, which over time led to people like William Faulkner to come home from combat with a deep psychological need to act out aggressively, which over more time led to Meredith Hunter pulling a gun on the wrong dude during Under My Thumb. But that, as they say, is showbiz.
Their intimacies a rape of decency. Their every enjoyment a parody of pleasure.
Now, if you'd like to begin your exploitation biker movie education, you can do no better than The Wild Angels. I also recommend Hell's Angels on Wheels, Easy Rider, naturally, and definitely Born Losers. The best way to see them? Go to DanaGould.com. Click on our Amazon banner, then shop away. You get what you want, and we get a little something to pay our poor editor, and everybody goes home happy. Man.
And now, on with the show.
Quite honestly, I think George and his wife at the time and the line producer, they were really looking for somebody to just take care of all that stuff for Tom.
Right.
And that became me. So going through resumes and calling Alcone Company in New York and Bob Kelly to make wigs, and I ended up ordering all the supplies.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of like foam rubber. I mean, one of the things is
R&D latex, and
because your job at KNB, and I know so many Garrett.
You know everybody. At the shop.
But you have to have like a chemistry background. Like, you got to know how to, or do you just like, no, here's how you make foam latex. You mix this, and then you cook it there, and that's what you do.
Well, listen, everybody's different. There are, and what's interesting about special effects and makeup artists is they're all wired the same, but different switches flip on different things.
Yeah.
Because you could sit in that room and talk about Invasion of the Body Snatchers all day long, and then when it comes to devising a gag versus a makeup, there's a very different mindset difference between gluing a prosthetic on somebody and transforming them into Austin Powers versus figuring out how to build something to chop someone's head off and have the blood spray the right way.
Right.
Those are two very different skills.
Yes.
And very often you have to make sure that you assign the right task to the right artist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's, to me, always fun about, like we were saying earlier, about you have that first meeting and you're sitting down and you're talking about, oh, we could try this, or what if we put a guy backwards and we put the head here and we do like Headless Horseman.
And that is, exactly what you're talking about. That is the most amazing thing, because even with CG now, if your eye's trained, you can always tell.
Yeah, of course.
And
you'll always be able to tell.
You'll always be able to tell. And when something's practical and you don't know how they did it, nothing beats that.
Yeah.
And the example I always think of is the the chest paddle scene in the John Carpenter's The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like they hired a guy who had no arms and put a mask of the actor on the guy that had no arms.
Yes.
Put fake arms on the actor that had no arms. It's just
and pulled them apart.
Yeah, and it's just, you think they did it completely inside out. You know, they didn't think, how do I get this actor and pull his arms off? They think, how do I get this guy with no arms to look like this actor? Yeah, man, you have it right on your phone.
I'm showing Dana a photo I got yesterday. Somebody sent
of course
that to me.
you did. That's fantastic.
But it's all about, and I think this goes back to the Tom Savini of it all. It's about being a magician. It's misdirection.
Yeah.
If you're on stage and you're a magician, you have to understand your audience. You have to manipulate them into believing that what they are seeing is real. That's what special effects is all about.
Right.
It's all about misdirection and manipulation. If you convince the audience it's real, then you win. If you watch Planet of the Apes and you, oh my God, they found a city with a bunch of ape people and they threw cameras out there and filmed it. You know, I used to joke about Dragon Slayer or Little Shop of Horrors, and I went, oh yeah, they went into this place and they found a talking plant and somebody wrote a script really fast and shot with it before it killed everybody. And to me, that's if you film is easier because you can cut.
Yeah.
If it's a live stage show and you have to do it live in front of an audience, it's very complicated. But in the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of these makeup effects guys used the same techniques and tricks, the same sleight of hand that magicians used.
Right.
Like Dawn of the Dead, you know, the famous scene where the machete is sunk into the guy's head.
Right.
And, you know, Tom talks a lot about that gag. And he's like, well, the first thing you do is you see him pull the machete out so that you're telling the audience that it's a full machete. And then you're up angle on him and he swings down, and then you cut down angle, and they took a machete and they cut a little crescent out and they put the machete on the guy's head and they filmed it in reverse. And when you pull the machete off and you flip the film, it looks like the machete is embedding into the head.
Right.
So you take something as simple as that. You're showing the audience different things and you're manipulating what they see. So guys like Rick Baker and Tom Savini and Rob Bottin and Stan Winston and Tom Berman, that's what they did. And that's, in my opinion, why the explosion of makeup effects films from 1976 to 1986 was because those movies mesmerized millions of people.
Yeah.
They were being shown things that either up to that point was either forbidden or they had never seen it before. You watch The Wolfman and the guy's, you know, Lon Chaney Jr. sits in a chair with a plaster cast pillow that cradles his head, and they would go in and lay hair on him over 5 hours, and that's how they would do it.
And you later recreated
and
that.
And I later recreated
with
that.
some dumb sap.
Who was awesome, by the way. But then that was what we, up to that point in our existence, that's what a werewolf transformation looked like.
Right.
That's what it was. Every ABC movie, Moon of the Wolf, or whatever the hell, any other movie, Paul Naschy, that was done up to that point.
Paul Naschy.
That's how the werewolf was transformed. You haven't thought of that name in a while, have you?
Oh, yeah.
But
I went to it instantly.
Yes, of course. Well, so did I. Yeah. And then you watch American Werewolf in London, and you watch The Howling, and you realize that these magicians figured out a way to tell the same story that we had seen over and over again, but they took it to a different place. What if their bodies transformed? What if we saw a wolf growing? I remember Company of Wolves, where the wolf physically, the wolf snout pushes out of the actor's mouth with a great fake head. And right at that perfect moment when special effects and makeup exploded onto the screen, Dawn of the Dead, Friday the 13th, in the 70s.
Right.
That was it for me. And then it was like I was captivated by the mystery, by the magic, by the misdirection. And what I had a meeting with John Frankenheimer. There's 5 meetings in my career that still stick with me like it was that day. Spielberg was one. John Frankenheimer was one. He was getting ready to direct the prequel relaunch of The Exorcist for Warner Brothers. This was 2004, I think, or 2002.
I believe Rennie Harlan started on that?
No, Paul Schrader directed it after Frankenheimer passed away, and then Rennie Harlan went in and reshot a bunch of stuff.
Right, I knew it was a very torturous...
Yes. So I go up and I meet Frankenheimer. He was shooting there was an HBO movie about Lyndon B. Johnson that he was directing.
Yes, it's actually a great Path to War. It's a great movie. It's a great movie.
So I went
with
and
Michael
visited
Gambon
him.
as Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah, so I went to visit him up in Simi Valley or Sun Valley or whatever, and I get to the set and there's a director's chair next to Frankenheimer for me to sit in, and they gave me the microphone or the ears cans so I could listen on the headphones.
And John Frankenheimer, if you don't cue to the name, he directed The Manchurian Candidate. He directed 7 Days in May. I mean, and then later in his career, Ronin, a truly living legend, directed, I believe, Patterns, which made Rod Serling famous. Probably directed a bunch of Twilight Zones.
Amazing
living legend.
Yes.
Until he died.
So we had this meeting at lunch because I was sort of vying for the job to do the makeup effects on The Exorcist. And we sat in his trailer for an hour at lunch, and I was with an executive from Warner Brothers at the time, was sitting there listening. And at one point we got into it, and he goes, what do you think of the biggest mistake that we can make would be?
What a great question.
And I said, I'll give you one. I said, I'll give you my initial, like right off the bat. I said, if there would have been coverage of Linda Blair being transformed by Dick Smith all over the newspapers and all over the television before The Exorcist came out, nobody would have believed it. The reason that people went to see The Exorcist in the theater was the terror of knowing that it could happen to them and distancing themselves from the fact that this is not a little girl with prosthetic makeup on. You're absorbed into the movie. I said, the first thing you need to do is be very careful of how you market the prosthetic aspect of this movie, because my vote would be don't ever talk about it. Don't ever show any photos of it. If the audience believes it's real, you have them. If they open Entertainment Weekly magazine and see pictures before the movie comes out, they're going to know it's fake. They're going to know it's fake.
Right.
Same with Jaws. Same with all those movies that came out. There's a great story that some people from, I want to say, the Christian Science Monitor or something, broke into the warehouse.
Yes.
And shot photos of the shark in the dry dock. And even the Time magazine, which is probably on that shelf right there, that came out the week that Jaws came out, big, cool Summer of the Shark. And
I remember that, yeah.
There's pictures of the mechanical shark with fucking spray paint on it, and the eyes are rolled back, and that drove Spielberg insane.
Right.
Because up to that point, they didn't want anybody to know how they made the movie. Because if somebody went, oh, it's not really a real shark, it's a bunch of puppeteers and special effects guys turning valves.
Right.
People wouldn't have cared.
Right. Well, what did I need to know what Frankenheimer said when you said that to him?
Well, of course, the Warner Brothers executive shit himself because he's like, "What are you saying? We can't market the movie." He was fascinated with the concept of making the audience believe it was really happening. So he loved the idea, and he was a fascinating guy. I mean, it was one of the greatest meetings I've had in my career because I got to sit with John and then meetings that we would have after that, he would sort of, well, what do you think? You know, I mean, it was one of those things that I think he knew that.
Did you do the movie?
We did do the movie, but unfortunately he passed away from a blood clot during prep. So we never made that movie. Then they hired Paul Schrader, and Paul Schrader took over. and shot a pretty fascinating, pretty interesting movie. And then the studio hired Rennie Harlan to go in and reshoot it once again.
You're looking at the venue. You're looking after the place. You know, how can we get them in safe? You know, we know that you can only get 800 people through one gate if you tear their ticket and pat them down a little bit in an hour. Okay, so how many gates do we need? Do we have armed policemen there to calm them down so they don't push? You know, do we have them in straight lines outside the gates? You know, are there areas, you know, for get them in out of the shade if they're out there for hours? You know, where are the T-shirts? Where are the T-shirts? We've got it set up nice so they're not in the same way as they're coming in. What about bootleggers? You know, the bootleggers are outside selling the same T-shirts, and then the kids come up with a really nice shirt on, your show. You know, it's like if somebody comes up with Dana Gould's face, and you go, wait a minute, I didn't even make that shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
And it might be nicer than the one your artist did, you know. But so you have the legal rights, since you have the vendor's rights on those shirts
property,
to go and seize them. But they got money and guns, so we need some shotguns and we need some thumpers outside to go and shake these people down and scare them a little bit. And then you find out that your own artist is scalping, you know, is bootlegging his own show, so he doesn't have to cut the promoter.
The vendors,
you know,
my Lord.
And so it gets so ugly, you know, and so
because there's so many revenue streams.
Oh man, and so there's things to think about, but then there's also, you know, backstage passes. Who can be backstage? You know, keep a clean backstage. You know, working crew has to do their job without, you know, and you know, is the guy from the crew, you know, going away with one of the girls from the crowd to get a knobber when we should, you know what's going on here with the sound.
Right,
you know,
right,
where's the sound guy? You know, and so, well, he's with Mary Beth. You know, and so there's different things to think about. So that thing, by the time we got there, all of the things that we normally thought about was just how can we protect this stage and our band, you know? That was all it was.
Right.
And it was just a salvage thing by that time. So it was such, you know,
because you have two problems. You have the crowd and you have the other security team, the Hells Angels.
And normally you're in charge of them.
Right.
But these guys aren't going to listen to us.
No.
You know, and there were only 5 of us. You know,
right? And
so we're going to do each corner of the stage, and then a guy, you know, Tony Funches, you know, he's going to be a floater. So if they come between us to get onto the stage, 2 can come one from each side, and then Tony, and so there's always 3 on 1.
Right.
So our people were never hurt. You know,
right?
Clean, 25 years.
And the nonsense, and if somebody is rushing the stage or putting the nonsense question is to break their concentration and to throw them off. And my brother is a prison guard and was telling me about this. If there's a fight and you'll go like, is the TV on? and it's not what they're expecting to hear.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What? Boo!
Is it soup yet?
Is it soup yet?
What the hell are these things?
That was my brother. My brother said,
So
ask him if the TV's on.
But it evolved so much. The business has evolved so much, you know, and now, I mean, it's. But in the beginning, man, it was more seat of the pants stuff, and
it was the Wild
We
West.
didn't know.
And how did it change? You know, many people think, yourself included, think that you know, Altamont was the antithesis of Woodstock, and that it was 3 days of peace, love, and then here somebody's killed, and that's the end of the 60s.
But that guy, you know, he pointed that gun at the stage.
Well, and that's what a lot of people don't understand.
Don't know.
A lot of people don't understand.
That angel got acquitted.
Yes.
You know.
No, he did his job.
Yeah.
A guy pointed a gun at Mick, and the Hells Angels stabbed him. Is that
right?
What I understand?
Hit him in the head with a knife, temple to temple.
Right.
And my brother said, "Kev, I need a hearse." And I said, "No, you need an ambulance." He said, "No, I need a hearse." And then, you know, Chuck Grant, God bless him, he died 2 weeks ago, and he said, "Are we still going to get to go to the party?" and you know, I don't know, baby. You know, we got out of there as quick as we could in the helicopters. You know, it was. You have to understand that the band are very proud of what they do, and proud that people come to the shows and have a good time, and they want to have a high quality product like you do with your shows.
Yeah, it's a business. This is my business,
and it's a business, and it's more. You know, there's something about live music where it comes across different than a record or an album. You know, it comes across different than a video. It's like live comedy. Live comedy, you know, to see the guy sweat and to see him interact with the crowd, or to be a person, or to watch the drummer, the sweat come off him, you know.
Yeah.
There's something about the low ceiling and the laughs coming off that ceiling, and contagious, or the bass hitting you in the chest, you know.
Totally.
So there's, you know, so the Stones, I think, were always very, very proud of what they do, and it's well thought out and conceived, and I think, you know, people say, well, people have to reinvent themselves. But what if you just consistently put out a good product? You know, like Keith always says, about every 5 years, they just kind of go, oh, that guy again. You know,
yeah.
You know, what happened to them? And they're still out there doing it. You know?
Well, that was the other interesting thing. George Carlin said an interesting thing where he said, I was only number one for a brief period in 1972. And I was always glad that I wasn't number one longer, because I was never at the point where you got sick of me. So I could always come back. And then of course Carlin would say, you know, like herpes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of validity to that, and that, you know, it's you're never so overwhelming to people that they get really sick of you.
Yeah, I think, you know,
it's better. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You know,
Keith always said, you know, a lot of the blues guys played, you know, into their 70s and 80s, and as long as they didn't become like a caricature of themselves, you know, like some kind of horrible Las Vegas lounge act, you know.
And that was the interesting thing, how people would say, like, especially, I think a lot of it was because of the line, I hope I die before I get old, in my generation, that, like, white rock and roll stars were not supposed to go too far after 30, but African-American blues stars could play until they were 80, 90, 100 years old, and nobody ever goes, I went to see Big, who am I thinking of that I saw? I was like, I went to see Johnny Lee Hooker. God, he's so old now. And I was like, nobody cares. It was a weird sort of reverse racism to that.
Well, that's right. I never thought of it like that. But you know, now we're seeing, you know, with these things like, what do they call that thing? Old Cella, you know.
Old Cella, yeah.
Yeah, with all those bands, and you know, I think, you know, and the bands, it's got to be hard too. You know, they want to play new things, and people are screaming for the old hits always.
Yeah,
you know, like you know, you want to write new jokes all the time. You've got new jokes. Current things have happened, you know.
Yeah.
And you want to bring it out, and people want to hear, you know,
the hits.
They want to hear clown fucker, you know. You know. I know I do. You know. Clown fucker.
I'll do it. The hits, playing the hits. Yeah, well, and it's so funny how you said, like, in 1978, you're working with the Rolling Stones, and Keith Richards pulls you aside and says, "You can't. Well, this isn't going to last.
Can't be a bouncer when you're 50."
Yeah, and
so I came back to Denver.
He didn't think it was going to last for the Rolling Stones.
No, I came back to Denver, and my brother was working for U2 at the time, and so you know, and I told him, and he goes,
and this is what year is this?
78. I came back and told him, I said, Keith told me I got to get a grip on my life. You know, and he said, well, man, if Keith tells you got a grip on your life, you better do something. You know, what are you going to do? You know,
just imagine after the show, Keith wants to talk to you in your dressing room. He's there in a sweater, he has a pipe. Kevin, have a seat.
But you have to understand, you know, they don't take it lightly. They take what they do very seriously, you know, and you know, there's you know,
can't
in his
have
whole
the
life,
career that they've had by being a fuck up.
Nothing by chance is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
It's not.
No, you can't have that career and be.
It didn't happen by chance, and you know, what I see a lot with music and comedy and veterinary medicine or whatever, people say, oh, overnight sensation. But if you really look, she or he, they've been doing it for 15 years, and they, you know, there's no overnight sensation. Somebody paid their dues, you know, they did the open mic nights, or they, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
funny because you mentioned it in the interview, and it's surprising that we've been talking this long and it hasn't come up yet, because people think of you now because of The Walking Dead as Mr. Zombie, although they're walkers, they're not zombies.
Yes.
But
we never use the Z word.
Yeah.
The Z word, as Simon Pegg would say.
We don't use the Z word. But in my opinion, I think your favorite movie, the movie that had the biggest impact on you, was Jaws.
Yeah.
You're into Jaws like I'm into apes.
Pretty much. Well, Dawn of the Dead and Jaws, sometimes neck and neck.
But you didn't work on Dawn of the Dead. I thought you did.
No, I visited.
Right. You visited.
But I was
because I remember watching
13
it with you.
or 14.
But I remember watching Dawn of the Dead with you, and you're going like, "Oh, that's Mike's hand." Yeah. Oh, that's because you know everybody in it.
Well, oddly, and that was before I met George. My visit to Dawn of the Dead came about because a guy I was going to high school with, a guy named Brian Wagner, his dad was named Bill Wagner, was the manager liaison of the Monroeville Mall.
That's amazing.
And I was riding.
Is it still?
It's still there. They've torn all the cool shit out.
Right.
Like all the oh, that's where that happened.
Right. Of all the things in that movie, that's the thing that sticks with me even more than the helicopter blade thing. The thing that really sticks with me in that movie is when the fat guy falls on the fountain.
Falls into the fountain.
That his fat is hard. Like I didn't know at the time. Like it's your body. It's not like a bunch of goo.
And it couldn't have felt good.
No,
to not put your arms out.
No,
to stop you.
Yeah, but it just it's like, oh, his fat's hard.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody that's ever seen that has been like, ooh, that's wrong.
And I remember, and this is growing. This just came to me. Growing up in Massachusetts at that time, the tagline of the movie was, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." Mm-hmm. But some of the zombies were nuns.
There was one nun.
There was one nun. And the fact that the movie implied that a nun would go to hell is what drove people in Massachusetts berserk.
I never thought about that.
The Catholic Archdiocese went insane about that one thing. They were so preoccupied they almost stopped raping altar boys. They didn't. They kept their eye on the ball. They kept their eye on the ball.
There was a moratorium one day.
Right, yeah, but yeah, Jaws. Jaws has had such a giant impact on you. There's so much misdirection in that movie.
Yeah,
and you talk about Steven Spielberg was one of your other big meetings.
Yeah,
that was
during the making of
Amistad.
Right. And
I know the story, but
it's a great.
Tell it for
it's
the
podcast. It's one of my favorite stories. So very often
that would make me a terrible host, but I know this story, so don't tell.
Yeah. So yes, next. But what happened was, very often we get calls from prop masters all over the city, all over the country, all over the world, because there are a lot of times when they need specialty props, and sometimes special effects gags. Like on Jurassic Park, we made all the eggs, the dinosaur eggs. And so there was one particular prop master named Jerry Moss who did all Spielberg's movies. And he would always call us. That's how we worked on Jurassic Park. That's how we worked on Minority Report. Jerry would say, listen, these guys always do right by me. So he called and said, there's a scene when the slaves revolt on the boat and they kill everybody on the boat. And free themselves. And there's this the captain is stabbed, and we want to do a gag where the knife goes through him and comes out in the deck below underneath a bunch of people that are locked in. So they're like, but we want the head to be moving and the arms to be moving. So it was like, oh, well, what we would do is we'll make a fake body. On an angle.
Do exactly what they did in American Werewolf in London.
Exactly. The old slant board gag.
Yeah, the old slant board gag, see?
Which works every single time, even though technically there's still a body underneath there, so you got to be a little careful. Of course, now they would just do it CG. Now there would just be no knife blade. But we were tasked with figuring it out. So we build this body. We go to the airport hangar in Van Nuys. They built this giant boat on a huge gimbal with pistons that could rock the thing back and forth, and there were dump tanks and everything. and I was there 2 days, and we went up and we put the slant board in, and we put the actor in, and we shot the gag. But it was the first time I had met Steven, and Frank Darabont, of course, said, when you meet him, you have to say hello and tell him that we're friends. So I think that's how you meet anybody famous.
Yeah.
You ever want to meet anybody famous, all you have to do is think of somebody that you might have in common with them to strike. It's like we said, the Kirk Hammett thing.
Yeah.
Strike up the conversation, and the awkwardness and the weird stuff goes away.
I recently spent a lot of time with Sean Penn. And when I said, I'm good friends with your brother Michael, which I am. And he went, oh, great. And then I went, I don't know what that means particularly. And he went, well, it's a good step towards you're not a crazy man that wants to kill me.
There you go. And then you never spoke about it. And then you never talked to him again.
Yeah.
But with Spielberg, I said, Frank Darabont says hello. And he said, one of the nicest guys I've ever met in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And he said, is he still collecting posters? Is he still doing it? So we talked about it for a little bit.
Right.
Meanwhile, of course, I had a leather-bound script of Jaws that I had leather-bound that was in my bag. And
it is too, like you're a Beatles freak and you're meeting McCartney.
Yes. And I have a Beatles album that I want him to sign, but I'm too scared.
Right.
So the makeup artist at the time, I believe it was Bill Corso, God forbid if I'm wrong, went into my backpack while I was talking to Spielberg and walked over and said, hey, Steven, you got to check out Greg's book.
Oh, no, you remember you're like, I'll murder you, Corso.
And I was like, okay. So he opens it and he starts looking at it and he's like, this is interesting. Where'd you get this draft? I said, Hollywood Book and Poster or something. It's just kind of my... And he goes, this was the rewrite that I did based on Carl Gottlieb's script. Or Benchley's script. And I said, yeah. So then he was like sort of reminiscing while he was reading it a little bit. And then he said, well, do you want me to sign it? I went, yeah, if you would. And then he wrote on it, it was a better read than a shoot.
Yeah. Easier to write than to shoot, was it?
Yeah, I have to find I have the page around here someplace.
See, I know the story, but he wrote easier to write than to shoot.
An easier read than to shoot.
And then Gottlieb wrote.
And then Gottlieb, that motherfucker, wrote, yeah, especially considering this isn't the script. So that was my Spielberg, my meeting, and I worked the whole night, and I had so much fun on that set. And
that is like I'm here with this guy that made this thing that led me to be doing what I'm doing.
And he's standing right in front of me.
Yeah.
It's not a picture in a magazine. It's not a person on being interviewed. And I'm such a visceral person in terms of my senses. And I went to DC once, and you stand at the bottom of the steps in Georgetown where they shot The Exorcist.
Right.
And when you're in a room with somebody that in some way, shape, or form contributed to something, you get your heart kind of races a little bit because it becomes tangible.
Yeah.
It goes from
I was so weird when I would talk to George Carlin. I would just look at him like, you're here.
Yeah.
We're in the same place right now.
It's the greatest sensation, the greatest feeling, because it reminds you of everything that you've ever been inspired by, everything that you've ever loved.
Yeah.
You can't help. It just inspires you. And for me, I think one of the greatest things about The Walking Dead is I get to now provide that to a whole new generation of people.
Right.
The feeling I had when I met George Romero for the first time, the feeling that I had when I met Rick Baker or had dinner with Rob Bottin and talked about The Howling and The Thing. And now I have the same opportunity to influence an entire new generation of people that want to do makeup.
Right.
They don't want to do computer.
Yeah,
they don't want to sit at a computer.
There's still people coming in that want to do practical effects.
Yes.
That want to,
They want to use their hands to sculpt. They want to use their hands to paint. They want to use their hands to create. it's really the greatest compliment for me to be able to put myself in their shoes and remember me being that 14-year-old kid.
Right.
And being inspired or moved or mesmerized by something. So that's what keeps me going. That's what still excites me about my job.
Yeah, and
every day.
And that's what is amazing, because you've done all the time that I knew you do a movie, which is great because it's your job for that year.
Yeah.
And I always, one of my favorite stories, I was going up to the shop I think we were just going to lunch, and there was a hotel laundry basket, one of those big wheeled canvas square baskets.
Right.
That you see in hotels when they have all the sheets.
Yeah, the linen
right,
basket.
Linen basket. Yeah. It was full of severed heads. And I go, what's that? And you went, we're going to China with Quinn to do this movie called Kill Bill. Those are the heads.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. Where do you want to go eat? But it was just...
And where do you want to eat lunch?
Yeah, exactly. Why did you decide to go into veterinary medicine?
Well, I liked animals, and I liked the science, and so I think it's a great thing. It's been a wonderful thing. 35 years at this practice, and now I'm getting to do a lot with endangered species. I'm on the board at the Denver Zoo and at the Smithsonian, and in 2000 they said, "Can you put some radio transmitters into rattlesnakes?" And I said, "Well, sure." And then they
now this is what I find fascinating. You're on the board of the Denver Zoo, and somebody comes up to you and says, "Would you put some radio transmitters into rattlesnakes?" Now, we've all been asked that question in our lives. You're the only person I know that said, "Sure."
So we did, and then they said, "What about polar bears? What about sea turtles? What about wild dogs?" So we it just branched out, and I've gotten to go to these wonderful places. And 1997, I was opening up for Betty White on the road. She's an animal advocate. I do 15 minutes on my little skit.
Thumping heads for Betty White on tour?
I was doing jokes. I have been like Forrest Gump. I'm a veterinarian, but I was a bouncer, and I'm a comedian, and I take the comedy serious. I do 200 shows a year, and you try and write new jokes, and so I was working for Betty White, and she's so wonderful, and it just as wonderful as people think. There's a lot of badness in the world, but there's a lot of goodness too, and you see it sometimes. Jagger going to the wheelchair kids, and not for a photo op, and Joan Rivers talking to the people after his show, and genuinely talking to them, and Betty White was so good, and so these guys would come in, these different people celebrity figures would come into the practice with an animal, and Dennis Rodman had some big snakes, and so
hang on. Sorry, I wanted to pretend to be surprised.
Dennis Rodman had some big snakes.
What?
And so, but he was so nice and he was so knowledgeable about them. So I got the idea of, it was 1997. I got the idea of. Lives of the Rich and Famous was the biggest thing on TV at the time, and so I thought pets of the rich and famous. So little Betty White interviewing people about their pets. Little Betty White interviewing giant Dennis Rodman about big snakes, and I could write the copy. These snakes live 55 years or whatever, and write the jokes. So I'm sitting on the airplane going to the next city with Betty White, and I go, "I want to do this show with you." "What is this show?" And so I told her, and she said, "Well, man, let's do it. Use my name." So I talked to the people. We knew Animal Planet was going to spin out from Discovery, all animals all the time. So I talked to this woman. She goes, "That's a great idea. I love it, love it, love it." And it got really far. Kept going up the chain. Right. And then the lady got fired, and everything on her desk was poisoned. And the new lady came in and goes, "We're not about comedy, but the biggest thing on TV is ER. What about an animal ER?" So I went to my boss and said, "They want to film an animal ER." He goes, "Cameras behind the wall, you're crazy." And I said, "Come on." He goes, "Absolutely not. Definitely not." So I kept going to him every day and go, "If we don't do it here, we're going to see it be done somewhere else." and we're going to kill ourselves. He goes, well, set up a meeting. So we did 11 seasons on Animal Planet, emergency vets, where they just did surgery with us every day, and it was nice. It
now,
turned out nice.
Are you on any of those doing surgery, or are you
all of them? I'm in every show, and
many people who watch Animal Planet, you're pretty highly visible on that. And what I find interesting was, I had a show on Thursday night of this week, and you were there emceeing the show, and then we hung out after, and then I went home, and I assumed that you went home. But you didn't go home. You went and performed a C-section on a Chihuahua.
Yeah, they called me on my way home. But you watch the shows, and the show is so funny.
And as the Chihuahua, like, I don't want a scar. I was like, I'm sorry. Man.
Yeah, I want a stripper scar so I can wear a bikini again. So I the show thing was so weird.
Do you know what a stripper mullet is?
Yeah.
C-section in the front, tramp stamp in the back.
Oh, God. Oh, that's, well, let me tell you the story about the Animal Planet thing. It was so weird because, you can't watch yourself on television. We did 175 episodes, and I couldn't watch myself because you go, that's not my neck, that's my dad's neck,
Oh, God,
and you're how old am I? And they like to do the happy endings. They liked it when that little cat came home and he's had his surgery and now he's playing with his bolly and drinking his milky and everything's right with the world. And Animal Planet had 92 million homes in the United States and 110 million homes in the rest of the world, over 200 million homes. And they gave the people tons of heads up that are going to come and film. You think they'd pick up their house? No, they're always in shambles. And this one time we got this old lady's house, she had curlers on. So I got to thinking, where is she going after this? She's got a way bigger gig than more than 200 million people. She's singing at the Super Bowl with Garth Brooks, or sometimes people would recognize you. At the airport, this kid came up to me and goes, hey, he's about 8 years old in the line. He goes, you look like that animal guy from TV. And I go, well, little boy, I am. And he goes, you wish. So it's, of course I am. But,
this was a conversation I had once with a relative. Hey, you're in show business. Is Tom Cruise queer? I go, I don't know. He might be. You're just jealous.
I didn't even say anything. You're just jealous. But I got to meet. I got to meet the crocodile hunter, and he. Whatever you think about him is wrong. If Steve Irwin, if he would have lived, because they had rehabilitated him from the guy dangling the baby over the crocodile, and he really was becoming a conservationist, and it could have.
Did he dangle a baby over?
Remember
a crocodile?
That he got in trouble.
No, I don't remember that.
And so he was doing all these things, but I got to be on his show. He came to the rattlesnake study site to film the rattlesnake study, and he was lovely, and he signed autographs for everybody and gave everybody T-shirts. And he was killed 2 weeks later. But I was
a squid or a stingray.
Stingray,
yeah.
And it got him in the heart. And then what happened was, I had met him 10 years before when we were showing our pilot to the network executives. He was showing his pilot, and his pilot was fascinating.
Yeah,
him and his wife in the darkest marsh of Australia, snagging crocodiles and throwing them on the back of the boat. You couldn't take your eyes off it.
Yeah.
He turned toward the camera and he goes, crocs are attracted to vibrations. And he pushes his wife out of the back of the boat into the water. Flap your arms, dear, flap your arms. And I thought, crocs this is going to be a huge hit, He's using your wife. He goes, using me wife as a decoy. He pushes her in the water, It was so.
And there's always a look in the crocodile's face when he picks him up where the crocodile's like, this was not what I was expecting.
No, because when you start off, the first ones you do, you go, these animals hate it if you stick a thumb in their bunghole, and but they changed him into this guy, and so, but when he did that, he goes, crocs are attractive vibrations, and he looked at his wife, using me wife as a decoy, pushes it in the water, and then flap your arms, and I was like, boy, using your wife as a decoy, this'll be a huge hit, but it was a shame he was killed, and so we did that show, and then, I've just been doing, the Denver Zoo bought 187,000 acres in Mongolia and gave it back to the Mongolians as their first national park.
Uh-huh.
And so endangered species, there's 10 million other forms of life on the planet. And, humans were given our intellect and this wonderful biodiversity of all these animals, and all the other animals are waiting for us to use our intellect to figure out how we can save the place. Because like we were talking, the extinction rate now is 100 times what it was at the end of the dinosaurs, and we think in the next 50 years maybe 1,000 times. So animals have always gone extinct, but never. There's been 6 big extinction episodes on our planet's history, and the biggest one was when the meteor hit it. But this thing is dwarfing that, and so we're seeing, like people ask me, why is it important to study frogs? Well, maybe by studying frogs we can save ourselves, or my bees are Emma's bees. I mean, if we lose bees, 130 to 150 of the different foods you eat are fertilized, pollinated by bees. Okay, and so if they were lost, we would lose so many plants, and it would really just be wind pollinated plants to eat, and fish. Because the earth, would be such a different place without just one little niche, one little cog of the thing.
Now, there's a theory that we are losing bees at a drastic rate. And I know that there's a bee dysentery. And I only know this from Emma Arnold, the comedian who is a dear friend who raises bees. And there's a mite or
there's a mite. There's a virus. There's a tracheal mite. There's a virus.
Do cell towers have anything to do with it?
No. For a long time they were saying it was cell phones and cell towers, but it's not. And it's these different things. And one of the biggest problems I think is different pesticides that are put into the environment. And it's easy for us, to get rid of these things, but then other things we hurt too.
Emma was telling me that she was at some beekeepers forum. Actually, she's just here. Why don't you just tell the story? This is comedian beekeeper Emma Arnold.
I've just been
is here to talk about bees.
I used to be the hobbyist liaison for the Idaho Honeybee Association, and I was at one of the...
That is not pornography related.
No, it's surprisingly unsexy. And I was at the annual meeting that we had with the honeymakers of Idaho, and the representative from the EPA was there to tell everyone, absolutely, neonicotinoids are not what is killing your bees. We're absolutely 100% sure that's not what it is. And all these beekeepers who take their bees down to California and they get massively exposed were like, no, we're telling you for sure it's killing. Like, I had friends who lost 7,000 to 10,000 hives in the winter of 2008. And they were like, for sure, that's what it is. And the EPA representative just kept saying, that's not what it is. We're 100% sure. We're positive. And then 2 years later, they came and they were like, okay, we actually did know that it was killing bees, but we weren't telling people yet. And so, yeah, it was pretty crazy.
So wait, you're saying that the government lied?
Yeah. The guy who worked for Monsanto 2 years before getting a job at the EPA lied about whether or not neonicotinoids were... Yeah. I don't know that for sure. That's just a hunch.
It's just, you wouldn't think that something as, each little species is a marvel in itself, and has a role, and so I think, to me, the world becomes a much less interesting place when we lose a species, and
sure.
And, we say that we weren't given this earth, we borrowed it from our children and grandchildren, and so I'm old, nobody's going to care about Altamont in 10 years, 20 years when I'm gone. But there'll still be these problems, and I think, it's still like a minute to midnight. There's so much we can do. With conservation, we think that our successes are temporary, but our failures are permanent when something disappears. And so, I think that, the animals are talking to us, and hopefully we're listening.
I was at the Daily Grill that's no longer there.
Yeah,
on
no
Laurel and Ventura.
Right.
And I was having a meeting with somebody about a movie, and there was an old woman sitting at the table behind me.
Oh, no.
It was a movie. It was Pete Berg. It was a movie called They Go to Vegas and the Bachelor Party Goes Bad. Very bad things. So in the movie, of course,
they kill a prostitute or something.
They kill a prostitute, and then they kill a security guy. So I'm having lunch with him, and we're talking about the movie, and I'm like, okay, so how do you see the bodies being cut up? The hands off, the heads off, the arms. And then we were talking about it. Little did I know that there was a woman sitting at the table behind me who was listening to the entire conversation and was quite convinced that we were arranging a hit.
Right,
and that I was soliciting Pete Berg to figure out how we were going to cut the bodies apart and what we were going to do with the body parts. Later on, of course, I think he left and I was paying and I looked over and this woman was just completely white. Hadn't touched her food, and I realized what had happened.
Did you say anything to her?
No, that would have sucked if I would have ruined it.
There's a similar story about.
I think I told the hostess, like, "Oh, you might want to let that woman know that we're working on a movie and not to call the cops or something."
No, that's funny. There's a similar story about somebody on a plane was sitting behind a producer. Talking to somebody, and they said, "Well, you shoot the pilot, and the rest is up to God."
Oh, Jesus.
It was on a plane.
Bad comment to make on an airplane.
But what is interesting and on movies, so you do that movie and then you move on to something else. Mm-hmm. You do Army of Darkness and then you do whatever comes next, and with Walking Dead, you're in the same world, you're telling the same story. And what I find interesting is that you've not gotten sick of it. You're more involved in it. And the thing that we didn't even touch in this interview, which is that you've also become this amazing director, which we didn't even get to.
Yeah.
But and I said, when I saw your first episode, granted you're my friend, but I think I told you at the time, like, look, no, this is really good. I'm not just saying this because you're my friend.
And I don't believe I never believe it because it's what we do. Yeah. What we love.
It does make sense in retrospect because you do think visually. You're always storyboarding in your head. But the first episode that you directed had this sort of a 12 Angry Men sense to it. Yeah. And there's stuff that's just straight dramaturgy that has nothing to do with anything. And you nailed it. And
well, that was the trick question. Darabont said, because you were there, I shot a film. I shot a short film. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an interesting story because. Right before,
I think I got a job because of that film.
Oh, well, I hope you got a job because of that film. You did. Actually, you did.
I did get a job.
That's right. So I was working on, I had a year straight where I had worked Inglourious Bastards and Predators and Piranha and all these movies. I got home and realized that I had a 6-week window before Walking Dead started. Because the show had been greenlit, and I was like, I always had this idea for this movie, this little short, classic monster kind of thing, and maybe now's the right time. So I called you, and you did a dialogue, you did a comedy pass on the script, and I sat down with my wife, and I said, we're going to spend a lot of money out of our savings. And I want to know if you're okay with it. And she was okay with it. And, we had 2 kids. And it was just something that I said, listen, I just want to try it once. I want to do it once to say I did it. And then I'm going to go on and we're going to do Walking Dead. And that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we shot the movie over 3 days. And it was a blast. And you were there and made you into the Wolf Man.
Yeah, in the plaster pillow of Lon Chaney.
Lon Chaney plaster pillow. And it was so much fun and so I can't even explain the process of having my friends around me because I called all my friends. I called Eli Roth, Frank Darabont, Serena Vincent, and we for 3 days we all kind of just shot a couple,
made a monster movie,
made a little, shot some vignettes.
Yeah,
and
King Kong is in it.
King Kong is in it. The Creature of Black Lagoon is in it.
Jaws.
Jaws is in it. Yeah. I mean, Dawn of the Dead, everything. I found ways
Dr.
to
Zayas
sort of...
is in it.
Oh, Dr. Zayas is in it. Everybody's in it. And if you're not in it, Igor isn't in it. Rick Baker, after he saw it, sent me a picture of him made up as Igor and went, why was I not in your movie?
Oh, that's so funny.
So anyway, you cut to Comic-Con, and we're doing the presentation for the first Walking Dead episode. So we had a sizzle reel, and I was on the panel with Darabont and Galen Hurd and the actors. And we're in the green room, and Charlie Collier's standing there, who's the president of AMC. And in my pocket was a DVD of the short. And I said, hey, listen, what do you think about playing this on the network in between some of your monsters for AMC Monster Fest?
Because it was Halloween. It was leading up to Halloween.
This was July. And it was, if you go back and think about it, how many times have you heard the story about somebody with their demo reel?
Yeah.
Handing it to the fucking producer or handing it to...
I got a song for you?
You got to listen to this.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was they said, well, we can't, it's 8 minutes long. We can't really find a way to play it on the network, but why don't we put it on the website? And Darabont and I did a bunch of interstitials, and one of the interstitials, they were called Killer Conversations, and he and I were talking about it, and he said, hey man, you just directed something, let's talk about it. And then they would say, and they would show a little clip of it, and they'd say, if you want to see the whole short, go to amctv.com, and that's where the short was.
By the way, Frank Darabont, one of the nicest human beings on the
It is, yeah. Spielberg was not lying when
Yeah.
he said that. So to make a long story short, they aired the short on AMC. And
the short is called?
The short is called United Monster Talent Agency. I
and
think
it's probably now on YouTube.
I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
But needless to say, that following February or January, we're at dinner for Frank's birthday. And he goes, all right, this goes back to the drama comment you made a minute ago. I think you're ready to direct an episode. But I want to know, would you want to direct a zombie heavy episode or a zombie light episode?
Oh, that's interesting.
And I'm like, ooh, that's a trick question. And I said, a zombie light episode. I said, shooting the effect stuff, I've done it before. I shot second unit on The Mist for Frank and Land of the Dead and for Rodriguez. I've shot that stuff before. I said, give me something different. So the irony is, not only did I have to kill off a lead character, Jeff DeMunn, but there's only one zombie in the entire episode.
Right.
And
the one that kills Jeff DeMunn.
The one that kills Jeff DeMunn, needless to say. And I was terrified. I don't think anybody really... I think Andy Lincoln at one point afterwards, when the episode was done shooting, he went, man, you did great. And I said, I literally shit myself every day. I was so scared. But I was so prepared. I picked like 5 movies that I watched that I thought had some relevance on the actual episode. 12 Angry Men was one of them.
Right.
And the scene when Randall's on the ground begging for his life, I watched Miller's Crossing. Very good. John Turturro.
You told me
scene.
before.
I did? Son of a bitch. I was giving... Oh, you should have never said that. I just gave you huge credit. So there were a bunch of movies that I watched to get... I watched Saving Private Ryan. There were things I watched just to get a little inspiration. And I remember getting schematics of the set and literally drawing where the camera should be. And I got the set, and Mike Satrazimus, who was the camera operator at the time, who then went on to be our DP and is now one of our better directors.
Right.
He literally was like, look how cute you are with your little schematics and your little drawings. He was so enamored with what I had done. And, he still says to me, dude, you were so prepared. You came in and you knew exactly what you wanted. You know how to get it. And I watched the episode recently because they did a marathon. Of course, that's what they do is marathons. And I was so taken by the episode. There's such great storytelling. And we had 10 different storylines going on.
Yeah.
And it was so well conceived by Frank, that whole season, and so well written. And the nuances, everything worked so well.
And it is amazing that Frank gave you that episode, because that episode is what the series is about. As at what point do we become the monsters? What is the difference between us and the monsters?
Yeah.
And so it's a sign of his faith in you that that he went, yeah, you take this, because that's the fulcrum of the seesaw of that episode.
Yeah. And now I've directed 20 episodes.
So I have two questions before we wrap up.
This is a two-parter, right?
No. One, so is your future, do you see your future as a director, or do you still like getting your hands dirty? Do you still like, not that directors don't get their hands dirty, but that you like to, well, what if we put the guy backwards and then we put a gimbal on, where do you?
Well, listen, one thing I will say is there are a lot of talented special effects makeup artists that aren't filmmakers, and they suffer because of it, because they put all of their thinking into the gag and not the thinking into how does the gag play within the confines of the movie. After directing, it made me a better effects guy because I could then look at things very differently. And the first movie I worked on after directing was Django Unchained with Quentin.
Right.
And I felt like some of the work that we did in that movie was the best work that I've ever done, because I was able to not only look at it from an effects standpoint, but stand back and look at it from a director standpoint.
Right.
And build to give the director the utmost flexibility in how he would shoot things. And
the testament of that is some of the stuff that you did in that movie people would not know was even an effect.
Right. And that's the thing you could always ever want.
So I remember going like, I thought that was Jamie Foxx.
Yeah.
Nope.
No, we're done. So I don't think I would categorize myself as one thing or another. I mean, I'm an executive producer, I'm a director, I'm a second unit director, I'm a makeup effects artist, I'm a filmmaker. So I feel like any responsible filmmaker really has to know how to do all those different jobs. Look at Jim Cameron, look at Robert Rodriguez, look at guys who love shooting their movies, they love editing their movies, they love designing all the effects, the visual effects. I mean,
you want to do what Barbara Streisand did in Yentl,
or What's Up, Doc?
What's Up, Doc?
And just destroy San Francisco.
Now, and the last question is The Walking Dead. It can be as simple. Do you know, or do you know who knows how it ends?
I do not.
Does
know
it end with them all getting on a helicopter and flying out of Korea? Just taking the MASH ending and put.
They could. I don't. I believe Kirkman has an ending in mind, but honestly, that would be the ending for the comic book.
Right.
But if I knew it, I still couldn't tell you.
Well, it's also, you could just do the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, just cut it in there.
and then the spick.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I could say about The Walking Dead is if you watch it high speed to yakety sax, it's a different show.
Oh, I haven't tried that yet. I think I might have to do that tonight.
Well, anyway, thanks so much. I'll probably see you next. I might see you in Atlanta, or I'll see you up here.
I'll see you somewhere in our monster nerd universe.
In our Paul Naschy reference travels.
I love that you love the Paul Naschy. If you could see the look on Dana's face when I said Paul Naschy, I've never seen a bigger smile.
Amazing. All right, let's stop. Every generation thinks that the next generation is going to destroy the world. Every time I make fun of millennials, I hear Jack Webb making fun of hippies, and then people from and Frank Sinatra making fun of Elvis, and Count Basie making fun of Frank Sinatra. Or I'm sure he didn't, but somebody, Glenn Miller.
Yeah.
So there's that, and there is something to be said that if the world didn't end in 1968, that it's not going to end now. But you do get that when you talk about extinction rates, that it doesn't increase
it metastasizes. It doesn't go from 4 to it doesn't go from 1 to 2 to 3. It goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. And you do get this. It's ever changing, and the effects of climate change and population, and that's tempered by the fact that the Earth is a self-correcting system.
To a point. If you look at what's happening.
But to that end, is part of the self-correction, we need to get rid of humans, and then this thing can fix itself.
Well, if we got rid of humans, it will go back to being this beautiful blue and green place it always was,
Right, yeah.
But humans, we're just animals too, We're part of the thing. We have our place. What's happening is the product of not one thing, like with the bees, it's not, there's a combination of things. And what's happening with most animals is 5 things. And HIPPO, the acronym HIPPO, human overpopulation, invasive species, pollution, different, habitat problems with, destruction of habitat, and then over hunting and over collecting, So, but destruction of habitat's happening so fast that some of these species, they can't find each other. They can't find each other to carry it out. But there's. People are, there's a lot of naysayers and doomsayers, but I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic because I think people we're crafty, and I think that we can overcome this thing. Yes, there's too many people, and it's going exponentially. Half the people that were ever alive on the planet are alive right now, okay, and half the people that are alive right now are under 25. Okay, and when you go to these third world places and you see the birth rates and stuff, and so we're going to run out of water way before we run out of oil.
Right.
And fresh water is only 2.5%, but of the water. But what I see that's so hopeful is the next generation, the babies. I go to schools and show the videos that I gave you guys, and I was at this little an impoverished neighborhood and tough urban place, and these little children, and I was showing my polar bear videos, and this little girl came up as I was leaving, and she grabbed my leg, my pant leg, and she goes, "Hey!" I go, "Hey!" And she goes, "I want to do what you do, and let's make it happen." I think, I work with the zoo, and zoos are tough for me, animals in cages, but more children visit the Denver Zoo every year than go to the Broncos, the Avalanche, the Rockies, and the Nuggets combined. So in many are inner city kids that they're not going to go on an ecotourism trip with their parents, but they get to see wildlife, and it turns on little minds, And so I think that the best thing to do is to work with children, they're the hope, and turn on these little minds. I remember what happened to me was, everybody was tough in my family. I wore glasses, and my grandfather gave me a pair of binoculars, and then you just look, and then he gave me a little microscope, old, cheap microscope, and you looked at water, and there were things moving in there, and so your mind gets turned on, and you can be more than a thug, you can make made way more money thumping heads than being a veterinarian, but who knows.
What is it that you do with polar bears? You travel every year.
Different studies. I've been able to go with different studies. The Denver Zoo had a study site at Churchill, so with Dr. Dave Kenny, that was famous for the Klondike and snow, the bears that were born here, We don't know why, but polar bears breed well in Denver. It's the right... something about the lights, maybe. The music's right. I got some get-together drops when I was working for Dr. John.
Get-together drops?
Yeah, these get-together drops from the River Mother Margaret. Keith goes, "You used to work for Dr. John. Call him up. Let's go." So Dr. John met us, and he took us.
Dr. John, the night trip.
Yeah, took us to this River Mother Margaret, and she read your fortune, and you had to buy something. Yeah. So buy something from me, I'll get and then I'll do your fortune. So I bought these get-together drops, and you put it on a girl's food, and then she must love you. But it was probably just food coloring.
Or Rohypnol.
But it always worked. It always worked. And then she had these magic shoes for girls that were just one size fits all. If you got the girl to wear it on the first date, then she couldn't run from your love. But it's kind of tough on the first date. Like, would you wear these shoes?
That's a bit of a stretch.
That's a stretch. But Keith bought a yellow belt that made him invisible. The yellow belt had choice on, and so, but I go, I can't see it, But so I think, the thing has been for me is with these different projects, at the Everglades, Dr. Doug Mader down there, all the different things he's been doing with sea turtles and the tumors that the sea turtles get. There's a virus in the water and they get these big tumors. And he at the Turtle Hospital down there did a comedy fundraiser for him, and with Kathleen Madigan did a thing for the zoo. The polar bears, we've been putting radio transmitters on polar bears and to find out how far they range, and so they're really.
So let me just set the scene. You're in South Pole, North Pole. North. You see a polar bear. You approach a polar bear and go, "Where'd you park?" That disorients the polar bear.
No, they got guys that dart them, and then the males can't wear the collars. Females can wear collars, and the males we can implant something. But then found out, wonderful researchers like Ian Sterling, the Canadian's been doing it his whole life, and wonderful people up there, the Manitoba Conservation. And so they go 4,400 to 4,700 miles a winter on the ice out on Hudson Bay. And so they're really a marine mammal. They spend most of their time on the ocean, on the ice, on the seals, because they really only eat one thing. So the ice should form about Halloween, but it's been forming later and later. So they're on land more, and they don't eat on land. They do a walking hibernation. They might eat some things, but really not the amount of protein they get with a seal. So we've learned so much, they've been to Svalbard and Seal River and different places. But, to be a little boy from Denver and get to see a polar bear, it's amazing. They're an amazing animal.
And you do get the feeling that and again, I say this being fully aware that every generation says this. But you do get the feeling that we are at the end of one era. And there's the effects of climate change, there's the effect of technology bleeding into our lives, globalization, et cetera, et cetera.
You're onto something. You're exactly right.
And the lowering of living standards. I think over the course of the next 100, 200 years, things will be drastically different. I read somewhere that human beings in less than 200 years will have gone through a functional change, that our physical bodies will begin to incorporate technology. And all this brings into question human evolution and how we fit into our particular biome. And Emma was telling me about, I'll let you tell it, but there's a geneticist that's come up with a theory of humanity 2.0.
Yeah, I don't know if he came up with it, but he explained it to me. There's a brilliant geneticist, Greg Hempikian, and he's part of the Innocence Project, and he's just an amazing person. But
and for those of you who don't, the Innocence Project is studying DNA evidence of people that are in prison and proving by their own, proving through the DNA that they're innocent, have been falsely imprisoned, and that people are then let out of prison because of that.
Yeah, and he travels the world.
And 9 times out of 10, the DA will not admit that they're innocent.
Yeah, even still.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he travels the world, helping people, and he also is a professor and has written a lot of things. But he met my son, Calvin, who's autistic, and he was very encouraging and kind to him because Calvin's very into science. And afterward, we were talking, and he told me that he and a lot of his colleagues don't believe autism to be like a disability, that it's actually like human 2.0, that it's sort of the next phase of evolution, which I think actually, if you've been around autistic people, really makes sense. I mean, Calvin, has high functioning and doesn't have a lot of the other disability stuff that can go along with it anymore. He's outgrown a lot of that, but he's very logical. He doesn't make emotional decisions. A lot of times he's very all about right and wrong and justice and fairness and to a debilitating point sometimes.
Sure.
But he's different. I mean, definitely different than, a neurotypical person, and in the way that he processes the world, and is very self-contained, doesn't need a lot of space, doesn't need, just is kind of, his own little entity. So I thought that was a very interesting thing.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating in the sense that, evolution, although it does not occur at a point where you can detect it with your eye, it doesn't, nor does it stop. And, I always remind people that when they talk about we need to be strong. This is good because we're strong. But evolution doesn't favor the strong. Evolution favors that which is the most adaptable to change. The dinosaurs died and the cockroaches lived because the cockroaches could adapt. There's an inescapable law of unintended consequences, where whatever you do, some element of its effect will not be planned and will by and large be the opposite of your intention. And this isn't anti-Trump. This is just a fact of nature, a physical fact of nature. And two great examples would be the Internet. The theory of the Internet was it would unite people with shared flow of information, and it would also allow you to get more done in less time so that you had more leisure time. Well, the exact opposite happened. It divides people because people are now moving into their own information readouts. It's like you said the other day, you talked to somebody that was like, well, actually there are more polar bears now than there ever were. Demonstrably false. Rush Limbaugh said the other day, there's more forest now than there was when the Pilgrims were here. Demonstrably false. Actually, there's 5% of the forest. But it doesn't matter because if you say it, it's true to a lot of people. And the same happens on across all political spectrums. My favorite example of it is the one-child law in China, the one-child policy in China, of which I know a little bit. And this stems from a very simple concept that culturally in China, if you have a son, when that son gets married, he and his wife come and live with you, and they take care of you in your old age. So a son is a retirement plan. And if you have a daughter, you're shit out of luck because she's going to go and live with your son's family, with her husband's family. And if you're only allowed one child, which was a state dictate to curb overpopulation, and you have a daughter, many people go, fuck this, let's get a son. And as a result, you have the Lost Daughters of China, which was the vast number of abandoned children, female children. Well, this all came from the concept of women having far less power than men do in China. But the result of the one-child policy is now in China, among adults, the men outnumber the women by, I believe, 5-1. It could be 7-1. So as a result, women are now incredibly powerful in China because the law of supply and demand comes into effect. And they are in great demand, and they have all the supply. And it was actually the complete reverse result of the intended policy. So that's going to happen, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I will say, like to what Emma said and what you said, it could be that humans evolve into. It would be interesting if humans evolved along two different lines. That you had Calvin, and then you had people that were just purely artistic. That you had the thinkers and the fuckers.
Hearts and the minds.
Yeah. And I know where my audience lies. So once again, thanks for listening, fuckers.
Other podcast reach for the sky. Dana Gould bound. We barely try.
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley, with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano.
Hey, if you like the show, why don't you drop us a line at show@danagould.com. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out. You want me? Peace out. Boom.